these incredible artists to the forefront of the conversation, and I think that's what we're all striving to do. I have my phone here so I don't forget anything. So this session, we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive with a lot of the artists that you saw with their art and their work, to then hear what they have to say through their art. And then after that, we will then have a discussion with Stephanie Ybarra from Baltimore City Center Stage, as well as Kananza Shale, who is a theater artist. So the three of us will have a panel after the artists, and we will bring on the artists for then your questions. Let me just give you the rundown of the artists that are going to be performing, which is Omar Offendum, which you, I think, saw earlier, possibly, Donney Rose, Justus Harris, Agnes Ugoji, and Jason Reynolds. So did I leave anyone out? Am I good? Okay. So I look forward to these performances and the questions and the conversation afterwards. So with no more me, I'd love to bring on Omar and his band.
The Syrians have been neighbors of the captains of finance and industry for many years. They settled in Washington, Greenwich, Rector, and other streets on the west side of the divide fully half a century ago. It was purely an accident that brought the first Syrian to the district. He got lost in the shuffle at the immigrants' landing at the Battery, drifted into Washington Street, where his red fez and foreign dress attracted the attention of the Irish youngsters who, after giving the lost foreigner an ungracious welcome, permitted him to settle in their midst. Friends from overseas followed him to the downtown tenement district. They came in a steady stream, pushing out the old residents little by little until they controlled the district. Syrians now occupy tenement after tenement, using them for workshops and homes. When Wall Street interests found expansion to the north and south was blocked by well-established business settlements, determined not to be disturbed, there was no other alternative but to invade the dwelling place of the Syrians.
Welcome to Little Syria, a show about a show in a part of town that doesn't have much left to show for it. Where the first Arabic-speaking, Levantine-leaning Shami family said, go for it. Published some newspapers, peddled notions to their neighbors, supplied hoods with dry goods that gave New Yorkers more flavor. We made money, wrote anthems, sewed dresses, ate lamb, drank coffee, rolled grape leaves, had babies, got scammed, built houses of worship, parlors and pool halls, rubbed elbows with Italian and Irish kids in school halls, worked with fellow Semites from the east side, fellow Asians in Chinatown, and when black folk moved up to Harlem, we showed them how we got down to the quarter tones of our heartstrings buried deep in the tenements. Echoing ancient improvisations steeped in a Byzantine Bedouin sentiment. There was life here. First Nations will attest to that. We were just the latest wave of foreigners to come along and redress the map, a short-lived experience for us Syrians, 5 decades to be exact, as real estate interests in the colony slowly but surely closed the gap. Wall Street occupied and invaded our street and way of life, sent us packing yet again to watch the city reach new heights from across the river, inspiring this one poet to write the following verse as he gazed across the skyline late one night. هجع الناس كلهم في المدينة وتولت على نيويورك السكينة وجفوني بغمضها مستهينة لا ترى غير طيف تلك الحزينة لست أعني بها سوى سوريا لست أعني بها سوى سوريا لست أعني بها سوى سوريا We are a people who move, always have, always will be, as wave after wave of invaders try to kill we. Romans, Persians, Mongols and Crusaders, Turkmen, Frenchmen, countless other raiders. Look, that's why I keep my boots out, waiting by the door, but you could never tear my roots out. Of this you can be sure, Syrian to the core, much like world history. Civilized yet vilified, shrouded in a mystery of great misunderstandings like some tragic game of telephone. Using our own gospels to justify them hellish tones, violence prone, banging on our bones like some xylophone. Music to their ears were the droplets of our tears, but no more. It is time for a new chapter in this land of opportunity, where promises of rapture and happily ever after lay behind the golden door, at least for those who showed up voluntarily, albeit warily. Ya Allah. We're on our way to Little Syria. Ya Allah. See, so many boats stopped in so many places, taken advantage of by so many smiling faces. Me and my entourage barely escaped the barrage. Eyes on a prize, praying it's not a mirage. My poor peerage, immigrants in steerage, indigent but ready to work, dealing with jerks at the barge office. It was hard enough getting here. Seasick, sweating, now I gotta deal with vetting here. Allow me to explain before you butcher my name. Label me unhireable, or worse yet, undesirable. I'm a man with a heart and a soul on a mission, here to build a better life, not asking for permission. I know my rights, and I intend to be fruitful. Unlike the poor trees where we came from, famine left us faint from. Several 100,000 deaths, rest in peace, west to east journeys, from a mountain to this treasure chest of Manhattan, where anything can happen. Homeland of the Lenape, whom Europeans were backstabbing and land grabbing. Slowly redrawing the map, New World, New York, it's a wrap. Ya Allah. We're on our way to Little Syria. Ya Allah. See, I've been so many boats stopped in so many places, taken advantage of by so many smiling faces. Me and my entourage barely escaped the barrage. Eyes on a prize, praying it's not a mirage. Let's go. Ya Allah. We're on our way to Little Syria. Ya Allah. Let's go to Washington Street. Washington Street is a street of New York, where my father, where Khalil Gibran and the Prophet was born. Every Arab person in America was born on Washington Street. Born in the Arabi neighborhood of some American city, whether in Dearborn, Michigan, or in Brooklyn, New York. Washington Street is our legacy. This music deals with the impossibility and the possibility, the absolute necessity to give expression to this legacy. Washington Street is a loud street. It is left to the listener to discern a meaning in the beating of the drums. Yeah, baptized in the temple of nature, groomed by the schools of the street. Damascus fraternity community committee make the congregation get up on its feet. Now listen, I don't need a seat and I don't need a cheat. My product speaking for itself, all I got is heat. Offendum's in the building, man, so y'all don't need to speak. And give thanks to my brother Joe, I don't need your beats. Little Syria gang gang making a bang bang. Low crotch bump along but letting it hang hang. Everybody know the name, ringing bells, clang clang. Getting money, making love isn't the same thing. Doing both though, crushing pistachios by the boatload. Stashing the dough up under the flow boat. IRS going loco. Got the whole kimono market in a chokehold. Pro bono? Oh no, no. Unless it's for my sham fam, bam, ham, tramic to San Fran. Doing what I can, that's quid pro quo. Back scratching, plan hatching for the takeover. This is serious business and we the stakeholders. Listen. When you take something pitiful and turn it into pivotal, that's how work is love made visible. When I say serious, y'all say business. Serious, business. Serious, business. When I say little, y'all say Syria. Little, Syria. Listen, march to the beat of Washington Street, named after the general, where the average resident's grasp of the English language is minimal. Putting in the work though, showing y'all some love. Sweat ring around the neck, chamois collar of the dub. Blessed to be alive. Paying it forward's the objective. Witness some Baba die that can afford you some perspective. Taking nothing for granted, let alone our breath. Hopes and dreams transplanted. Measuring success not by money hoarded, but by family members supported. Papers being sorted, nobody being deported. Boarding house quartered, imported and exported. Some of the greatest poets history's ever recorded. It's the colony. We left the motherland solemnly, following Solomonic prophecy, Deuteronomy wish list. This promised land full of richness is now bearing witness to serious business. Yeah, look, when you take something pitiful and turn it into pivotal, that's how work is love made visible. When I say serious, y'all say business. Serious, serious. When I say little, y'all say Syria. Little, little. Damascus Fraternity Community Committee, putting in the work down in New York City. Damascus Fraternity Community Committee, putting in the work down in New York City. That's right, Jabron. Thank you. Work is love made visible. هجع الناس كلهم في المدينة وتولت على نيويورك السكينة وجفوني بغمضها مستهينة لا ترى غير طيف تلك الحزينة لست أعاني بها سوى سوريا لست أعاني بها سوى سوريا. Fast asleep are all the people in this beautiful city, and falling upon New York a feeling of tranquility. Yet my eyelids still deceive me, as they see nothing but that enduring sadness that bereaves me, to which of course I could only mean one thing: Syria. هجع الناس كلهم في المدينة وتولت على نيويورك السكينة وجفوني بغمضها مستهينة لا ترى غير طيف تلك الحزينة لست أعاني بها سوى سوريا لست أعاني بها سوى سوريا لست أعاني بها سوى سوريا لست أعاني بها سوى سوريا.
And now, please welcome to the stage, Donney Rose.
Welcome to the American Audit, a poetry and mapping project chronicling Black life in America, 400 years in the making. In the American Audit, America is big business, being audited by African descendants of slaves. Let's see what the findings uncover. Audit, an official inspection of individuals or organizations' account, typically by an independent body or organization. Time to investigate. A superpower born of blood at the behest of stolen goods, to uncover files that contain records of distressed bones, interrupted dreams, fragmented families, repurposed culture, swollen throats, severed limbs, mothers and daughters of rape, sons and fathers of lynch. America is big business. A global conglomerate hustling a false bill of sale of freedom, a revolving boardroom of men that favor founding fathers, reaping residuals from commodified bodies that built its core. America is an exhaustive commercial with a multi-hued cast of citizens cosplaying as something equal, but when the cameras pan outside the lens of worldview, the hyphen tethering the African to the American is a choke chain pulling the Black back into its subservient position of origin. America cooked the books, touted trinkets of Black progress as proof of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, gaslit dissatisfied customers that it never intended to humanize, and here we are, a 4th century stockpile of birth and death certificates up for review. Every life, a line item from a budget orchestrated with the intent of America going into the black with no concern of moral bankruptcy. But yo, we got nothing but time to get to the center of the findings necessary to rid this nigger factory of the inventory it's so heavily invested in, to bring up multiple generations worth of violated labor laws, to issue citation after citation of inhumane practices in the name of growth. Dear America, if your ethos are so intact, this process should be quick, painless, a mere checklist of benchmarks attained, but if it ain't, we got some shutting down to do, some liberties to liquidate. We can no longer postpone to give you time that we can never reclaim. Auditor. The auditor is a person with the demonstrated personal attributes and competence to conduct an audit. I came a long way from somewhere in the Congo, or I came a long way from somewhere in Ghana, or I came a long way from a detour in Wales, or a detour in Ireland, or a detour in Sweden, or a detour in Norway, or I came a long way from being settled in South Carolina, or I came a long way from a long passage down the river to the bowels of the bayou. My birth certificate says Louisiana. My mama and them says Lafayette Parish. My daddy and them people says somewhere in the Acadian, says Creole or something, says I come from a hodgepodge of DNA from drops of this, that, and say what now? But me, I bring you greetings from North Baton Rouge, specifically Scotlandville, or Scotland for short, which is also ironic because somewhere in the jungles of bodies that produced bodies, I too came a long way from Scotland, the one across the pond that I ain't never seen. But mostly, I come from a place of curiosity, of inquiry, of a desire to know why my blood drips across terrains that I cannot trace back to the starting line. I want to file a complaint, speak to some stakeholders. Don't tell me they're all dead. Their children, and their children, and their children all have stock in my subjugation, so somebody gotta have some answers. I need to see some papers. Auction papers, Constitution papers, the script of Jim Crow laws, redlining maps, verbiage that denotes voter suppression, medical records reflective of sterilizing practices, Miranda rights, loan denials, test scores that dictate a divestment in hood schools. I need receipts. Proof that I was not shipped here to function in misery until I die and be replaced with another cog in a melanin machine manufactured to do America's bidding. I have been on a journey spanning generations to get conclusive data as to why I am still living like the spook that sat at the foot of democracy, attempting to nourish myself with crumbs spilled from the mouths of gluttonous gatekeepers. Can someone, please get someone to speak to me about these findings, about these principles that have been under the watchful eye of a world skeptical of its alleged equality? America, you have ran in the red of my blood for far too long to operate as is, so something's got to give. You tell me, how shall we proceed from here? Scope. The audit scope is the extent and boundaries of an audit. It generally includes the physical locations, organizational units, products, projects, or processes, and the time period. Mississippi be like, Alabama be like, Georgia be like, South Carolina be like, North Carolina be like, Virginia be like, Louisiana be like, Kentucky be like, Missouri be like, Florida be like, Arkansas be like, Maryland be like, trauma destinations. Be like, crack that whip for cotton, crack that whip for tobacco, crack that whip for sugarcane, for can't see out my disfigured eye, for bones too old to work like they did when I was the child I came here as, for quivering lips confused as backtalk, for crying about my baby sold right out the womb, for resistant knees refusing to part from master's pleasure, for not carrying the dead body off the field, for having the audacity to sweat, the audacity to tire, the audacity to plead for empathy after lashes lacerated midnight flesh to sunset pink. What we know of trauma unattended is that it migrates the marrow of bloodlines it's been exposed to. What we know of power unchecked is that it functions as a defect, a cognitive disorder, disassociating victimizer from victim, which is to say, the whip is a shapeshifter. Became the pen that wrote restriction, the keys that locked away descendants of its victims, the gun of the slave patrol turned police, the syringe that injected poison for the purpose of experimenting, the hardened powder that proliferated public housing projects, the color line dividing hues and hair textures. Watch the tools of destruction be reintroduced to the market, new and improved with every bit of progress made by those it was meant to destroy. America is an assembly line of whips, a 365-day producer of punitive instruments designed to break the will of black folks. The manufacturing, more sophisticated with every advancement of property turned people, which is to say, if 13% of the American dream are subjected to deplorable customer service or regularly pitched a product intended to devalue, deconstruct, demoralize, then we, the recipients of unjust horror, own every right to recall this abuse. And every piece of metal and bone and fear that made it serviceable. 400 years of defect does not make for something salvageable. It makes for an enterprise of error in need of issuing lifetime rebates for humanity it discarded, then restocked to be consumed by careless customers. So what is the move, America? The signs demanding a refund for all that you stole are not coming down anytime soon.
Please welcome Justus Harris.
like to start with a quote by William Gibson. "The future is here, it's just not very equally distributed." This is part of a work in progress. This is part of the idea of what is a citizen and what is an artist, if an artist is a person, primarily. I'm a patient. I'm an artist. My name is Justus Harris. This is an image of my body. That image shows a boundary that contains a chronic illness that's usually invisible. When you start to participate in understanding these parts of your existence, they become visible to others. And so thinking about this, I thought, what other things impact people that are invisible? So when it comes to the physical, I have type 1 diabetes. What does that mean? It means that my average life expectancy is 66 years old. Other things within the body include a cancer. They include hypertension. They include type 2 diabetes. They include things that seem to only exist within our skin and are often invisible. When we see this skin, this shape, we can think possibly the same thing. The average life expectancy in the US is 78.6. The sense of progress is seen in that there is no state in 1950 that life expectancy was 68 that still has that life expectancy. So we see progress when we divide our country up. But getting closer to the individual, what happens when we start to zoom in closer? This is an image of all the counties in the US. And there are 2 counties that have a life expectancy of 68 or less. One is Oglala, Lakota in South Dakota, which is in the Pine Ridge Reservation is entirely within, and Union County, Florida, which contains a maximum security prison. These are invisible. In many ways, people begin to look at health and the images we collectively imagine about health as a metric of progress. So what happens when we start to look even closer to where we are right now at an individual level? When this is present day, where we're at the Kennedy Center closest to Georgetown. A census tract is one of the smallest measurements that the Census Bureau uses to show life expectancy, economic status, and other work used for statistics for business and in health management. We're 2.5 miles from the US Capitol. In Georgetown, the life expectancy is 86 years old. 2.5 miles in a different direction is the historic home of Frederick Douglass, which has a life expectancy of 68 for that census tract in Anacostia. What does progress look like when we start to zoom in to the individual? And one of the things that I am so interested in exploring is what tools do we have to imagine so many people and so much information in a way that's personal? There are 671 census tracts in the US that have a life expectancy below 68. How do we start to look at this as a boundary and as the collection of things that become invisible the way the world is constructed, the way communities can suffer just the way an individual can, and not being provided the access to treat a personal chronic condition or a public experience or in a community? The idea of social determinants of health having the most impact in someone's life expectancy and there not being a chronic condition. They are things that include access to education, access to housing, poverty. They include things that we may not even be measuring yet, where access to clean drinking water or inaccess to it can cause higher blood sugar and resistance of insulin, that these things are connected, that these two experiences, the personal and the collective, are connected. The piece outside is part of this exploration, connecting what tools do we use to understand our personal experiences, and how can we empathize with one another. The most important metric we have is the life we have left to live. And without that number, we can't use anything with that time. So I invite you afterwards to continue this conversation and these ideas with me. And what connections might you have with people who are in geographies that connect to your physical state, or vice versa? How can you start to imagine, or how can we start to imagine our country as a whole, despite how many million people there are, in the most important metric there is? Thank you.
And now, please welcome to the stage Agnes Ugoji.
Oh, this is blinding. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Agnes. Come on, can you hear me? Oh. Okay, I'm just not going to play with it. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Agnes. I'm from 826. I am an alumna of 826 Boston, and I'm also a student at Dartmouth College. They told us that this skin has never been anything but a burden, but a stain that only bleach could cure, but a curse they seek to eradicate. They told us that we were animals, so they locked up our brothers and buried our fathers. They told us that our bodies are monetary, and for centuries we've watched white hands pickpocket our genes and sell ourselves to slavery. They told us, they told us, they told us, and each time they tell us a tragedy strikes. Each time they write the news. Each time they write the laws. Each time they take our cultures, they take our religion, take our love, take our stories, and turn them into weapons. And a Wemana proverb states, Nawatolama, Mumpeya, Eyensebala, Aleyan, Tomokwe, Senaya. Until the lion has his own storyteller, the hunter will always be the victor. It reminds me of something I like to call American amnesia. Example, A, Black women, among the first suffragettes of this country, but their names will never make it farther than the footnotes in our textbooks. Example, B, war does not see color like we do. Every battle that America has fought has also been a Black battle. Those who write about war do not write about soldiers darker than the pages they use. Example, C, Latino and Native American experiences are always the sidekicks to our Black and white history. Example, D, middle school history class. It is the final exam, and the last question, an essay, asked me to list the negatives and positives of colonization on African people. I sat there, unable to write, as if my pen didn't trust me, as if my culture knew something that I didn't, a collective of untold African stories that expected me to condense, to summarize, to disparage in a matter of 5 paragraphs. Long story short, I failed the exam. But see how easily narrative can be eradicated, how textbooks had long erased the ink stains of our ancestors' past. But isn't that how America works? Always whiting out its mistakes. Funny how we are expected to know the insides of jail cells better than our textbooks, how we know chains better than diplomas, how jumpsuits fit us better than robes, that we are too busy in prisons to teach our own history. Is that why the white man calls it his story? It is imperative that we inherit our heritage, that we rewrite the narratives that exclude the sufferings and the victories of Black and brown bodies. But all they know how to do is ask us how our skin is so dark, how our naps coil itself into a fist, how our lips grow wide enough to catch fireflies in the swoop, how we jump so high, how we run so fast. If they can touch our hair, they never ask us how we smile the crescent moon to shame, how our laughter is healing from centuries of pain and prejudice. How our skin is not the dirt that privilege walks on, but the earth that pride grew from. We have mistaken blackness for a void, for the absence of light and not its creation. How we have forgotten that the sun has deemed us worthy enough to shine on. Have we forgotten that God herself rubbed solar flares on our foreheads and deemed us worthy enough to glow, to highlight the next generation of children with skin so dark, with ideas so bright and brilliant, it reminds us of all the reasons our ancestors hold up that battered fist. We're reminded of the whips, but never the winnings, never the countless times they said we wouldn't amount to anything and we did. We're reminded of the popular trees, but never the fruits we bore, never the swollen bellies of constellations and night sky that is our lineage. We are not the blackened portrait of a distressed history, but the mosaic of the American experience. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Jason Reynolds.
So I'm just going to tell you a couple stories about these, and I'm going to do a little bit of a reading, and that's it. Here's the thing, right? People always ask how Spider-Man happened. Like it's like never in a million years that I think it would matter that much. So people are like, "Yo, how did you?" Yo, the strongest person on earth. It's the top one. Am I doing the wrong one? I'm like, bruh. Sheesh. So people want to know how Miles Morales happened, right? Like why and how and this, that, and the third. So here's the thing. Marvel called me, right? And that's the thing. Marvel can call people, right? The company calls you and they say, oh, we have this idea, right? And of course you're like, oh, who is this? And I'm like, oh, this is Marvel. We want you to do this thing. And you're like, wait, are you serious? They're like, yeah, this is Marvel. And and Disney's on the phone and we're all here to talk to you about writing Spider-Man. And I'm like, nah, I don't think I want to do it. I'm good because I got other things to do. I'm not interested. And that's true. I said no. And they're like, oh, you think you'd like to do it? And I said, no, I really wouldn't like to do it. I'm cool. Like, I'm good. I got other things going on. I went to a school in Oklahoma. There were all these black boys in ISS in school suspension. I don't know what they were doing or what they did, but they were all there, like maybe 20 of them. And I was asked to go and speak to them for a bit about some other work that I'd done. I'd written a book called All American Boys. So I go into this room, and I'm talking to these brothers, and they're like, well, what you working on now, Mr. Jason? What you doing now? I said, well, I just got a phone call. They said they want me to write Spider-Man. And they said, Spider-Man? Yeah, it's like, yeah, black Spider-Man. Miles Morales is Afro-Latino. It's a whole thing. They're like, what? It's a black Spider-Man? I'm like, yo, it's a black Spider-Man. They're like, yo, he live in the hood? I was like, maybe, I don't know. They're like, yo, he wear Jordans? I was like, I could probably make that happen. Like, I don't know. And then I realized, all right, I'm going to go ahead and say yes, right? Next thing you know, Disney says, come to the office and sit in the office, and we're going to celebrate you taking on a deal. So I show up to the Disney office, and they say, we're going to toast to you signing the contract. And then as we're about to toast, they say, why don't you give us your pitch? Hadn't really thought about it. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, no, I'm going to blow the deal as I'm about to drink their champagne. Let me drink it now, right? And so they say, well, what's your idea? What's your concept behind the story? I said, well, in my mind, I start to think about sort of who we are, try to contextualize who I am, who I've been, how I grew up, how my friends grew up, and what this means or what this could mean if we try to expand the narrative, which is what we're here to talk about. How can we expand the narrative? So the first thing I said was, hey, if I'm being honest with you, with all due respect to Marvel, Peter Parker, Stan Lee, and the whole enterprise and legacy that he's built, Peter Parker has a major flaw. He said, well, what's his flaw? I said, well, the major flaw is that Peter Parker, Uncle Ben told Peter Parker, don't forget, with great power comes great responsibility. And Peter listened. And the truth of the matter is that is a fallacy. There isn't a teenager on earth who I would walk up to and say, hey, I'm going to give you all this power. And that teenager would look at me and say, and you know what I'm going to do with it, Jason? I'm going to be more responsible. That doesn't exist, right? It's literally counterintuitive to the way teenagers operate, right? First thing first. Second thing I said was like, look, if this kid is going to be of African descent, then I need to make sure that we change the story, not because his story has to be othered, but because his story is. It is different. It is textured. We need to put the cultural touchstones have to be there. Andy from Brooklyn. All that matters, right? They said, okay, well, what do you have in mind? I said, well, first of all, you have to understand that if you are a kid coming out of a certain community, there's what we call survivor's remorse. Right? What does it feel like to be the superhero of your family and your neighborhood? What does it feel like to be the only one that has made it, that is different, that has the ability to do things that your friends and family cannot do? That has to be in the story. Number two, There is no way that if I am a superhero that I come home and I say, Ma, I gotta save the world, because my mother says, first of all, you need to save this homework, then you're gonna save this house, then you're gonna save your block, then you're gonna save your neighborhood, then you're gonna save your city and all the black people on earth, and then we can deal with the rest of the world. That's the way it operates. That's the way it works culturally in our homes. Number 3, at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure that we also got to get at the fact that this is a young man that puts a mask on and becomes invisible, and when he takes that mask off, he still is. What does that mean for him as a superhero? And lastly, Peter Parker has like all, Spidey sense, this, that, and the third. If you take those same superpowers and you transmute them and you put them in a black community, specifically a black urban community, what you see is not a superpower, you see survival skills. Spidey sense is something that my mother gave me when I was 9 or 10 years old. The ability to see the bad thing coming 10 minutes before it gets to you is literally survival in a lot of our neighborhoods, and I wanted to make sure that we saw that really what he is just a black boy in Brooklyn who happens to wear a suit, you know what I mean? Now, that's how it all came about, and then they said, before we chose, tell us the plot. And I said, uh-oh. And then I said, well, here's the thing. I'll take this deal and I'll do it if y'all let me do what I want. They said, well, what do you want? I said, I want to use Spider-Man and I want to write a hyper-literary, this is a literary story. It is studied in school. They are using it in high school as curriculum. I want to take a Spider-Man story and I want to make it literary with all the nuances and sophistications of any other book. But I want to use Spider-Man to tell the story of the school-to-prison pipeline. And there you have it. After that came Long Way Down. Long Way Down is a book. Some of you may have read it, some of you may not have, but the long story short is it's written in verse. It's an entire novel written in verse that takes place over the course of a single minute of a young man's life. He is on an elevator, the entire book. This young man is on an elevator ride from the 8th floor to the ground floor, forced to make a decision about whether or not he is going to avenge his brother's death. He comes from a community like many of us come from, where there are rules. No crying, no snitching, and you always seek revenge. I come from that neighborhood. Right? And I wanted to write a story that humanizes these kids. Now, here's the thing. The book comes out. Everybody says Jason Reynolds has written a book about gun violence. Not necessarily. Doesn't mean I don't care about it, and I don't think we should talk about it, because we should. And if we can use this book to do so, let's do that. But it's not necessarily about that. That's the easiest way out, and it's a bit lazy for adults to say that this is a book about gun violence. What it is a book about children. The truth is, before we get to gun violence, before we talk about figuring out how to fix the gun issue, there are a lot of questions we need to ask ourselves about why kids pick up guns in the first place. Perhaps we should try to figure out what they're up against, where they're coming from, the kids in some of your classrooms, what do they have to go to get to your school, the hoops they have to jump through. What kind of pain do they feel? Who have they lost in their lives? Who's turned their back on them? What have they seen at young ages? And then you put politics and miseducation and starvation. You put the projects and city life. You put rural life and all the other things on top of it. And you have the nerve, and we have the nerve to say we got to talk about guns. No, we have to talk about children, right? And we have to humanize them, right? And we have to humanize them and acknowledge their pain and anger. America has a hard time talking about sex and anger. We struggle with it. So it's easy for everybody in here to claim peace when your peace ain't never challenged. But when that peace is challenged and the part of humanity shows up that you ain't never seen, you don't wash it away by calling a kid a thug. You ask that child what's the matter, right? Now, lastly, before I get out of here, this is a book called Sunny. I chose this book to read from instead of these two because I think this book, when we talk about stretching and expanding a narrative, means more to me than either of these or the other 10. At the end of the day, I think it is ridiculous that if you are a black kid in any space that is not a black space, there are two things that are automatically assumed about you. Either you are the coolest kid in the room or the toughest kid in the room. And that's not fair. Truth of the matter is we deserve to be weird like everybody else. I want to be a misfit. I want to do my thing and be a little strange and be left of center if I feel like it. And those kids exist. Black kids who love manga exist. Black kids who love Harry Potter exist. All those young people exist, and their stories deserve to be told. So this is a story about a young man named Sonny. He runs the mile on his track team. He's this whole book is epistolary style, so it's all letters and it's all kind of interesting ways of writing stories because I think we should all be pushing ourselves creatively. And I'm going to read a couple of his diary entries, and then I'm going to have a seat. Dear diary, it's been a while. And because I brought you back after spiraling your backbone back into place, backity back, Aurelia for some reason feel like she need to be introduced to you all over again, like she don't know you, like she don't remember you, but I do, so we don't have to shake hands and do the whole my name is thing, but Aurelia might need to do that. Today she asked me if I still call you diary or if I call you journal now, or maybe notebook. I told her diary. I've always called you that because I like diary. Notebook? Nah. And dear journal don't really work the same. don't do it for me. Dear Diary is better, not just because of the double D, alliteration, action, but also because diary reminds me of the name Daryl, so at least I feel like I'm talking to an actual someone, and Daryl reminds me of the word dairy and diary are the same except for where I is, and I like dairy, at least milk. I can't drink a lot of it, which you know, because it make my stomach feel like it's full of glue, which you also know, but I like it anyway because I'm weird, which you definitely know. You know I like weird stuff, and everything about milk is weird. Even the word milk, which I think probably sounds like what milk sounds like when you guzzle it. Milk, 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 milk. I should start over. Dear Diary, this is my start over. Aurelia asked me how long it's been since I've spoken to you. I told her a while. When I was a little kid and I was all yelly, and Daryl wanted me to be more hushy, he gave me you and told me to put the noise on your pages whenever I felt like I needed to, which was all the time, except for when I was running or sleeping. Told me to fold it up in you so he could get some peace, so he could have quiet for concentration when we picked at our puzzles after work. Yes, Diary, we still do puzzles together. It's still our way of, I guess, bonding. Anyway, after a while, my brain stopped pushing so much loud out my mouth. Stop noising up the puzzling, thanks to you. You know how a health bar make you less hungry, but don't really make you full? Diary, that's what you are, a health bar. You take the hunger growl out of my mind, and once I got to a place where the growl was pretty much a purr, I stopped writing in you. But now the volume on the growl is turning up again, and even though it's being turned up, I can feel it working its way down, pushing behind my eyes and marching over my tongue, ready to come out. And my father, well, he still don't want to be disturbed, and I don't want to disturb him and his work and his newspaper, and definitely not them puzzles, because the puzzles are our time. So Diary, thanks for still being a friend, something for me to bite down on, something for me to whisper scream to, because sometimes I have too many screams up there, and they boing boing in my brain, boing boing in my brain like a jumping beam, boing boing in my brain like a jumping beam, my brain a moon bounce at a party nobody invited to, and now I can put them in you again. And now Aurelia's asking me about it, about you, asking me about journaling, no, diarying, which sounds a lot like diarrhea-ing, which is sort of the same thing. Aurelia told me she think it's a good thing I've been writing again. Even wanted to make sure I understood that whatever I write down don't have to make sense as long as it's really me, really my brain and heart stuff, and that's a good thing, even though I already knew that, because making sense makes no sense to me. Sense should kinda already be made, right? It should already exist like love or maybe sky. You don't have to create it or choreograph it or nothing like that. At least I don't think you do. So none of this has to make sense. It just has to make me, me. I'm already me, but it has to make me something, make me quiet and calm, and maybe also make me brave enough to do what I'm going to have to do tomorrow at the track meet, which is probably not going to be quiet or calm. That's the real reason Aurelia's interested in you, Diary. She thinks I don't know that, but I do. I know because I know she know I'm scared. That's why I brought you back. I'm so scared, and scared don't sound like eek or gasp. Scared sounds like glass shattering. Scared sounds like glass shattering. Diary, after all these years, you ever not want to be written in or on? Am I writing on you or in you, or both? And how does that make you feel? I've never really asked you that. You ever just want to stay blank? Just be paper or whatever you think you are? Because I know what that's like. And tomorrow, my father will too. Oh, also, Aurelia called you a journal, but you a diary, so I will call you by your name. All right.
Again, can we give a hand to the entire group of artists who you saw today? So I have to vamp a little bit while they set up the chairs, but I think what we're going to talk about next with our panelists, as we continue to kind of absorb the art that we just saw, is to pivot a little bit and talk to the people who are purveying the work, who have, many of them had their work or doing work around the United States, around the world, and to really try to have a little bit more of a deep dive of what those challenges are and what those opportunities are. I think the premise for this panel will be that, and you see this right now happening at the Art Summit and happening just right now, with all these artists, that artists are the soothsayers of all of our times, since ancient times, and they tell us who we are, they tell us who we're going to be, they tell us about our future. They are the heartbeat of our society, and if we're not listening to artists, we're simply just not listening. And this is just a fact. It has been borne out from the Greeks and will continue to be so. And the importance of listening from everything from hip hop to poetry to theater to fine art has never been more important. There will always be inflection points in our history, and this is one of them. And so I urge you all as practitioners and people who, I can't see your faces because of the bright light, but all who practice in this field, you know, there is a both renaissance happening that is incredibly fabulous, but also is incredibly rough and tough. And how do we work these challenges out? But first and foremost, you know, putting artists at the forefront and speaking and hearing them as artists. This is what we have to listen for, the beauty, the joy, and the language, whatever it is, music is the first step in our way forward to celebrating artists and to finding a way to make change. And so now let's bring up the panelists, and I will introduce them. Let's see, I'm over here, okay? Great, so first, Stephanie. We have Stephanie Ybarra from Baltimore Center Stage. She is the new artistic director there. Keneza Shal is a international theater artist. I think I couldn't remember all the countries you've been to, but it's pretty amazing. And please forgive me, I forgot Laura Brief, who is head of the amazing 826, National 826, which is, I think, an incredible poetry infuser initiative in the world for young people. And I'm thrilled to sit with you guys and talk about sort of the next step in this moment in time and for the future. As I said, artists are the soothsayers. They must be heard. They're at the forefront. They're the first to be put in jail. They're the first to, you know, sort of speak out or protest. So Laura, you work with a ton of young people, and we heard one of them today. So I think it'd be good to start with you to tell us sort of what is the pulse. What is the pulse? We hear a lot of pulse today, but what is the pulse coming up?
Yeah, I don't know how much we should be asking me what the pulse is. Maybe we should be asking Agnes what the pulse is, but I think the pulse is the future. And what we hear bubbling up from young people is just the want for a future that is very different from where we are today. And the framing for this conversation is interesting one from where I sit, where part of the power of our model is all young people are writers. And everyone should envision themselves, not just envision themselves, but understand themselves to be a writer and be able to access the power that comes with that and the joy that comes with that. And so when I was listening to the original question about artists being the soothsayers, I was sitting with this question of, like, how are we defining an artist, right? And when we think about, excuse me, all of the young people who are learning to consider themselves writers, does that also mean they're artists? And if so, they're soothsayers too. So that's the question I was just sitting with and thinking about your frame.
Mm-hmm. So Keneza, you have been around the world. Your work has been produced all over, and you've been in many spaces, you know, from the high fancy museums to the local communities. Tell us how good a job, I guess, those places are doing to welcome artists at this moment, and artists in general. And then we'll talk about audiences too, but first artists.
Well, I think as a performance maker working in the theater, as you well know, the work lives in its contact with an audience. And I've been thinking a lot in my practice about public space and about making work that's speaking many different languages and that is centralizing lexicons that are often not centralized in the spaces where I'm presenting work. And to render the work visible, literally to make the piece happen, requires gathering audiences who can speak many languages. And I'm interested in making a feast where everybody eats, and I'm also preparing that feast on behalf of very specific audiences. So, for example, with Jack And, which we just closed at New York Live Arts, but was also at BAM previously before that and has been all around the country, the piece is thinking about reentry to society after prison, focusing not on the time one has served, but the measure of dreaming that is given to the state, and how do we all rebuild dreaming after trauma. For that piece to live, for it to live in space with an audience, requires having people there who have experiential knowledge that relates to the content of the piece. So much of the work has been about framing the performance and inviting people to the show and collaborating in every city we travel to with reentry communities.
So Stephanie, that sort of leads to you as a bigger institution or an institution. One, how do we provide the context that you're talking about, Kanesa, and the fact that everyone is, a potential or is a writer, and that everyone is telling stories in so many different ways. How do you open your doors, particularly in a city like Baltimore, but in any city, honestly? How do you open your doors and give context all at the same time? Performing arts is particularly, can be particularly inaccessible, I would say. So talk to me a little bit about how we walk that line.
I think this will be the great question of my, I hope, my career that I'll just keep chipping away at, because I don't know that there's one answer. And with every new revelation, it seems like there's a new obstacle to overcome, or at least I think that's the way it should be. And I think a lot about not just opening our doors, but then getting out of our doors. The work I did at the Public Theater in New York before coming to Baltimore was very much about that, about going into civic and public spaces and activating those spaces as performance spaces, as storytelling spaces. So there is a physical barrier, a geographical barrier that has been removed. We do our performance for free. Great, now the financial barrier is removed, but we're not done yet. And in order for us to continue to open our doors, whether they're physical or metaphorical, we have to look beyond the geographical barrier, the financial barrier, and get into the sort of the cultural barriers, the tacit barriers that we all not ignore, but we as theater makers or consumers have been living in and swimming in, so much so that we take them for granted. What does it mean when we have an audience full of people with their cell phones out? What does it mean as a theater maker when somebody wants to unwrap their candy in the middle of a performance? Who cares? We do, right? We put so many tacit barriers that go way beyond our physical structures or our price points in the way of consuming or exchanging with our audiences. So that, I feel like, is the sort of next frontier.
Yeah. And I also think there's, how do we celebrate artists in this moment? Because there is a lot happening, that there's so much intersection right now, I feel, and I think all of us feel, between obviously the art, the political, health, you name it. It's all coming together in a tsunami of voices. We have social media, that is bombarding our kids in not so great ways, but also giving agency and ages to put out your work, and be a rapper, or put up your song, or put up your poem. It's incredibly accessible in some ways. But at the same time, all of the artists that we heard today, there is the level place, the origin story, as it was said, the level place. And how do we, as educators, makers, producers, remember that? How do we celebrate and nurture that in a time that's very noisy? And because every artist, it's the human condition, and that's where we come from, and I feel like we're losing that a little bit. So how do you tell a young person, that it's okay to write, or what to write, or how do you encourage them?
Great question. I think it's about safety. And I think it's about creating spaces that feel safe to be yourself and where your whole self feels seen, and creating not just physical spaces, but working with young people to help them find the space within themselves where they feel safe. And I think writing is a tool by which they develop that safety within themselves, and that sense of connectivity within themselves. And it makes me think about, Agnes, something you said. She was describing a writer's room in her high school in Boston. And she talked about her high school being a place where you saw, you thought about science and you thought about math, but you didn't think about the artists. And walking into the writer's room felt like a room, a place where she could take off her mask and be seen as she truly is as a writer and as an artist. And so from my perspective at 826, that's you work to create the spaces in which students like Agnes can feel that way.
Kanesa.
Well, I think that all art is political. I think that if you are an artist who places spoons in a row on the ground and that's your creative practice, you are a political being working in political space with political exchange all around your practice. And so dealing with all of the materials in the room as theater makers, dealing with the language and the sound and the light and the objects, and dealing with materials like race and gender, that these are all the social materials in the room. These are all part of a pursuit of excellence, ultimately. And that to have an understanding that addressing experiential languages, addressing historical languages, addressing cultural languages is part of creating excellence, creating magnificent work together, creating work that can speak to many different people, that social practice and creative practice cannot be separated.
I'll reiterate, I'm going to double down on what you just said and quote Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote the book Emergent Strategy. And she says, I'm going to get the first part right, and I'm going to paraphrase the second part. The first part is, art is not neutral. And the second, ever. And the second part is something to the effect of, it is either disrupting or upholding the status quo. It's never in the middle. And that becomes, I feel like that's another way of saying the civic practice and the artistic practice or the social practice, they're all there together. And I would say that from where I sit as a producer and a sort of facilitator of art making, I'm sort of working on the other end of the sort of artistic pipeline, right? They start when they're younger, they're professional artists now, whatever that means. And they will find their way into my theater or my field, hopefully. But one of the things that I find challenging about the safe spaces that we do and don't create for artists, whatever their medium is the notion of excellence and the problematic sort of colonial notions of excellence that we all carry with us. And I feel like for the last 10 years, I've had to undo the previous lifetime of what I was taught about what it meant to make great theater or what a good piece of writing was. And so I feel like one of the muscles I have to unlearn and refashion is how to meet an artist or a piece of art wherever they are and help to facilitate that path and find that audience, and to not sort of bind it by, in my field it's like Aristotle, that guy, why do I need to be measuring anything by what Aristotle wrote a gajillion years ago? But I was trained to do it.
I'll challenge that a little bit. I think, we have to understand our past to understand our future. I still think there is, and this is me being a panelist as opposed to a moderator, but I think there is that question of, what Shakespeare does mean and what the Greeks still mean to us. And I think if you talk to many artists, black, white, all different colors, their influences, run the gamut. I think there is that tension today of, between young people and theater makers, how can we be the disruptors, but also how do we, understand our past and, to make us smarter, to make us better, and to make us, to humanize, to make us better humanists for the future. So I think that's sort of my next question is, when you do your work, Laura, what is it that you want to, affect? What is it that you want to come home to and say you did what? Because these are the purveyors of the artists that you're seeing here, that you're seeing everywhere, or some of them, and everybody's got to make this connection to humanize this conversation right now. I think it's important to kind of hear personally what's juicing you.
Yeah, not to repeat what I was talking about this morning, but what really is the thing that motivates us, is the work that is happening in schools, is happening in our writing centers, but the bigger question of the catalytic impact of what does it mean for the tool of writing to be equally distributed in this nation? What could this country look like if we were all able to participate? If the stories, history as soon as it's written is a reflection of my perspective and my prejudice, no matter who I am. And so we need all of the stories and all of the voices, and what could our country look like? What could the governing of this country look like? What would art look like that is seen in this country, if that was something that was universal? So that's what moves us, is what is our responsibility, knowing that we have a method of teaching creative writing and teaching writing that really moves young people and works and helps find the joy in the craft as well, knowing that we understand that works and has an impact. What's our responsibility then to be sure that we're doing what we can to get it into classrooms everywhere, and also onto the agenda of the right thought leaders everywhere.
So responsibility in getting onto the agenda, everybody must be a writer. I think that's, that is a huge dream, and I think we all need to work to make that attainable. Kanesa, what moves you forward? What connects you?
How ideas move in the world, and this magic of theater being a moment where you have a community for that hour and a half, for that 60 minutes, whatever it is, that an exchange of ideas takes place. With cartography, the piece that's thinking about migration and mapping, how did we get from the hero's journey? How do we get from the Odyssey to the depletion of resources as a narrative of humans moving in the world? And in my practice right now, a lot of how I am interested in the work moving has to do with creating touring networks in the global south and throughout diasporic communities in the west with the global south. So I came up performing in the kind of European tour circuit, and there's a very established model for all of that. So presenting work in the United States and presenting work in Africa and Asia and South America and Central America is something that I'm thinking a lot about, and thinking about how to really create networks for contemporary performance to move.
Stephanie. All right, just.
I would say what moves me, I'll speak really quickly. Anti-racism and anti-oppression is like motoring me these days. It's just a never-ending fuel, unfortunately. But I would also say sitting in rooms like this and witnessing the sort of spectrum of mediums, of voices, and I'm listening to Omar and Agnes and Donney and Justus and Jason, and the synapses are just like going a million miles an hour. So simply being in the room with makers is always a motivating factor for me.
and everybody should probably do it. Everybody. Every day. Everybody. So speaking of that, let's invite the artists back onto stage. That's what I'm doing, yes. Let's give a hand to the panelists. We're going to invite them back with some chairs, hopefully, and to do a quick, we'll do a Q&A both with, for the panelists and the artists as well. There were no, oh, here we go. Thanks for moving the chairs. My son loves your books. My son loves your book. Thank you. Right, everyone needs to read the book. All right, so this has been an incredible. We have a chair.
I'll not stand, actually.
Well, no, there should be no standing. Everybody's equal. All right, so so this has been a great afternoon. I mean, to have art makers. It's been a thrill, I think, and a real treat. And again, humans reign. So with that, I don't know if we can get rid of some of these lights, but I will try to see. Let's have some questions, and you'll get the mic, and we'll start. Yes, sir.
So my name is Brian Perlman, Executive Director of Street Sense Media. We're based here in D.C. And I've heard, not so much in this room, but a little bit today, this myth that we give agency or we teach creativity. And that's not been my experience. I've worked for almost 4 decades with people who live outside of all ages in this city. And what I've discovered is art is sort of like the divine. And you don't have to go to church to find it. And it just brings up, it's organic. The more oppressed you are, the more you find your creative voice because it's what has to grow up out of you. And I hope we get to know this. DC has the highest per capita rate of homelessness in the country. Someone talked about life expectancy, 20 to 30 years less if you experience chronic homelessness. And most people in this city experiencing chronic homelessness are children. So we're shortening their lives by 20 or 30 years. And in this city, and I'm sure all across the country, we destroy people who are living in poverty. We destroy them. And I appreciate this amazing event because we're telling the stories, and when we've got to raise our voices, we can either get in the way or we can amplify. We can't create, we can't teach it. We can amplify it and make sure it's heard.
Yeah. Give space to it. Next question. Oh, great. We got.
Hi, thank you. My question has to do with allyship, and I'm wondering if anyone on the panel wants to give a good example of how allyship supported shaping new narratives that kind of counter the dominant narratives, and if anyone wanted to comment on that.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, when it comes
Use the mic.
the mic. Okay. All right. When it comes to allyship, I think one of the most important things is just stepping back a lot of the time to allow narratives that are not usually heard to be heard. Especially, I know a lot of my experience comes from college campuses, and it's really important sometimes when a speaker comes, especially we had once a Black woman come to speak to us, and she just said, I would like for those who are white in this audience, especially white men, to just step back and let people of color and let marginalized people come forward and ask their questions and talk to me. And it's not that she's silencing them, but she's saying, for once, could you please step back so that others can come forward?
I have a story to add about this young Syrian kid who was in Munich, who was 17 and was way too good looking. Like, the most good looking kid, cooler than any of us could ever be. Perhaps Omar was that cool when he was 17. But I was certainly not that cool. I don't think anybody else could have ever been as cool as this child. And my partner works in children's books as well as Jason. And and is now publishing other people's books, and was like, you're such an incredible thinker. Like, what do you think? Maybe you want to make a book. And he looked at him with all the like sass of a 17-year-old boy. He looked at both of us and he was like, do y'all have dentists where you live? And we're like, okay. Yeah, we have dentists. Like, we knew we were gonna get our asses handed to us. We didn't know how. He was like, yeah, we have dentists. He's like, yeah, well, when my tooth hurts, I go to the dentist. We're like, oh yeah, us too. And he's like, if somebody wants to learn French, they go to my sister because my sister's a great French teacher. Like, oh yeah, I'm sure she is. He's like, I'm trying to figure out if I need to learn German or if I'm going back to Syria and whether I'm gonna get a job and which school I'm supposed to go into and if I can stay in my same housing. Y'all are storytellers. That's your job. Do your story. And I think with the politics around who tells whose narratives today and all of that, it was a very poignant perspective to hear about storytelling as how it functions within society.
So I think it was Agatha, correct? Agatha talked about the concept of stepping back so someone could step forward, which I wholeheartedly agree with. I also kind of want to add to that. For me, with some of my experiences with allyship, either from a perspective of white folks functioning as allies for me, or myself functioning as an ally for women or queer folks or whomever I may have had a position of privilege over, the idea that those of us who are in a power dynamic have to come to is divorcing ourselves from this myth of a scarcity of resources. Because what often happens is that folks will decline functioning from an ally perspective out of fear of losing something. And the thing is, so many of us from various races and genders and nationalities have played such a heavy part in building the richness of what America is, not just fiscally, but also culturally, socially. So there's enough to go around. And if you are functioning from an ally capacity, you have to do so with the idea that if I assist someone in getting a leg up, that doesn't mean the legs are being swept from under me. I'm just adding to the tapestry.
All I'll add is that I think that, like, at some point, allyship, or the term allyship and the way we think about allyship has become flat. It's paper thin. At the end of the day, for me and mine, when I say me and mine, I mean me and my allies, quote unquote, my friends who are white and privileged, or myself in circumstances where I am the person in privilege. I don't need allyship, I need advocacy. To be an ally means that basically if my hands are tied behind my back, you're gonna stand next to me and be like, hey, I'm gonna stand with you with my hands behind my back. And what I needed for you to do is help to untie my hands and fight off all the people that's coming for me until I can figure out how to get free, right? Like, advocate for me. Like, that's like a real, you really want to see who with you and who not. Put them in the hot water and let's see what really go on. And if they hit you with, they're like, well, I don't say that. Well, you didn't tell him to stop. I don't want to have to fight my fights no more, bro. That's literally your job. It's to lay it on the line for me and advocate for my humanity, is what I'm saying. Or advocate for me to be able to advocate for my humanity,
Yeah, I just want to comment on that because allyship is, I think of the allies, like the war, right? Whereas advocacy, completely different. And to change that narrative, I think is huge, is really huge, and that would be a huge step forward. Okay, more questions. Over here? I
want to thank everyone for sharing their passion and their heart with us today. My name's Heather, and I wanted to comment or challenge this notion of reading Aristotle. Someone raised that point. And so I want to challenge the notion of it actually making us smarter or making us better. So one of the things I'm trying to confront as a scholar and an artist is our privilege and the systems that we put in place that exclude people from being able to participate in this art. And so when we say that certain groups of people haven't read Aristotle, are we removing their legitimacy by saying that they would be smarter by having read these works? And by thinking about who tells our history and who's been excluded from that, how we're excluding certain groups of people from this narrative, And I participate in that privilege by being here today, right? The money that we pay to be here today excludes certain groups of people from feeling like they can exist in these spaces and feel comfortable in these spaces. So I really challenged myself to consider how I reify that privilege by participating in this today. So as inspiring as it is to be here, I consider how we are advocates for the people that cannot exist in these spaces, who can't afford to exist in these spaces, or who are made to feel like they do not belong in these spaces. And so that's something that I am grappling with as both an artist and as a scholar, how we change that narrative and how we participate in that privilege. Like, how do we change the systems that prevent people from being able to learn how to read and write? And so that's just something that I want to like kind of leave in the air for us to think about when we leave here today.
Thank you. All right. I think any more questions back there?
Thank you, Ed.
I want to say thank you for your comments about allyship. So I really loved when we were talking about, when we heard people talking about the beat, and also this language that we talked about whether you're upholding or you're subverting. And I don't know how we can help but do both. And the beat for me is about moving between both of those spaces and moving between them regularly. The allyship piece is, how do I do my authorship? How do I take myself away from my family, from my city, to create, to reach in and build something new, and yet keep the conversation alive with other people? Because I find it so isolating. And I think a lot of our students find that too, is that they're like going, how can I reach deep? How can I churn out these narratives? How can I ask people to subvert their space and make people feel uncomfortable and still, and restore not just myself, we haven't talked about self-care, but also restore those bonds of trust that are weakened from just taking ourselves away and trying to create something new.
So I think that the one thing that I'd like to offer very quickly is that I think that there is a misconception that writing has to be isolated. I've written several books with other people, and because we all have our own stories to tell, and because we live in a braided world, a world that is intertwined, a world that is complicated and intersectional, a world where all of us in this space have different stories, and yet somehow we are bumping up against each other right now, that can exist in story, right? Our collective story can be stories, right? Like All American Boys is not just my story, it's me and my buddy Brendan together, right? And because of that, we were able to do the thing that you're asking. We can still have space to share, have space to converse, have space to build trust and intimacy, and do all the human things necessary to survive and operate within our practice. It's not like, theater does it, music does it, dance does it, and so I think I want to challenge the notion that writers have to be alone, because we don't.
Yes.
Good afternoon. First I want to say, speaking to Aristotle, Aristotle held the natural slave theory, believing that people were naturally predisposed to being slaves. So that also enabled him and Socrates, Plato and others to be able to walk around and critically think all day long because they had a whole slave society supporting them. These are the kind of things that are not talked about because oftentimes we want to be comfortable. And this is what plagues us with major arts institutions, because they unfortunately do not bring in work that make us uncomfortable. That's how Black Klansman did not get the Academy Award, but the Green Book did. And this, I think, is what we need to challenge ourselves, and part of what we need to have that conversation as I ask these questions about art to challenge, because when arts institutions don't bring in people of color and oppressed people on a large scale, to talk about these things, to bring about that discomfort, because that's what brings growth, we remain in the situation that we're in. And people understand, just because I'm making you uncomfortable doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means we have some stuff to talk about, and you need to sit down and listen, right? So how do we, as major arts institutions, reverse this sort of dynamic, particularly getting local artists who are equally as valuable as all these national artists that are being brought in to really blow these doors open and create this kind of narrative, because at the end of the day, art is an anti-violence program. You want to greatly ameliorate violence wherever you are, you ensure art exists everywhere.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. This has been a great afternoon.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, that was fun. Aristotle and Socrates. Damn. I didn't know.
Voice, I was just texting her about that. We will now be on a 15-minute break and convene again here in the Theater Lab at 3:30 p.m. Thank you.
that show repeat. Good, that's what we need. Are you here or do you have to? I have to check.
Okay, friends, welcome back. Hope you had some great breakout sessions. I got to see one of the deep dives, and it's like only more awesome questions are raised that we wish we had more time to talk about all of them. So I always think about our breakouts give you sort of an appetizer version, right? When we start all the conversations, we get to go deep a little bit, and then we hope you're left wanting more, that those conversations continue throughout the rest of our time together, and as we build these bonds throughout all of our friendly and professional connections. So to recenter us in this space for the afternoon, we have a few amazing things on the agenda, but we wanted to really reset ourselves with performance. So I want to give my friend and colleague Holly Bass props for helping to make a connection to the artist that we're going to see here in a second. So we have the company Flyground. So Leela Aisha Jones Flyground will present short excerpts from several evening-length works that include the Native Portal series and the Plight release and the Diasporic Body series that focus on release, restoration, and revival for Black folks. The interdisciplinary artists who are part of this project include choreography and concept by Leela Aisha Jones, movement artist Amanda L. Edwards, Anye Piku, Surya Swilly, and sound artist Alex Shaw, Farai Malianga, Leela Aisha Jones, film art and documentation, Aiden Un, and tech and production, Alex Shaw. Can we give a nice warm round of applause for him?
How many broken, bruised bodies, hearts, minds, spirits will it take to understand we are all human, to break a cycle, to make what is unnatural despicable, to make what is natural life? Respect for Black life is not a priority. Get out the car. 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 Get out the car, nigga. Get out the car, nigga. Get out the car, nigga. Get out the car, boy. Get out the car, nigga. Get out the car, girl. Get out the car, nigga. 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 That's what they say. Get out the car, nigga, 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 nigga. Get out the car, nigga. Get out the car, 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 get out the car. Everything is life. All living things are everything. When we break, bruise hearts, bodies, minds, spirits, we break and bruise everything. All living things, we break and bruise ourselves. Take me to the water. Take me to the water. Take me to the water to be baptized. Nothing but the righteous. Nothing but the righteous. Nothing but the righteous shall see God. Take me to the righteous. Nothing but the water. Take me to the righteous waters. Okuosa, Okuosa, ye mi malolorio mi agifilokio. I told Jesus it would be alright if he changed my name. I told Orisha it would be alright if they changed my name. I know that Jesus saves some. If I am deeply honest, Jesus keeps the collective black spirit going. That fire that can rise and you be like, that thing never dies. Damn. Diaspora and freestyle saved me. Together and with careful consideration, catching all those restorative spirits and a goon might bring us all into glorious revolutions around one another. Then maybe Jesus can rest a bit, at least take a nap.
Hey girl, ain't no mystery. At least, as far as I can see, I wanna keep you here, laying next to me, sharing our love between the sheets. Sharing our love between the sheets. Your
child. Ooh, 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 child. Ooh,
A 1-2 piece. Good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon. Y'all clearly have not learned shit this day because just reciprocity. I loved that part of what just happened was these young women did something amazing and had to be cajoled to return to receive their affirmation. Something instructive about the humility of those particular women, but also instructs us, one, to get your propers, but two, that some of us have to be pushed to receive love. So push others to receive love and receive love in return, please. In the spirit of narratives and shit. Me and the boy wear the same shoe size. He wants a pair of Jordan 4s for Christmas. I buy them, and then I steal them from his closet like a twisted Grinch-themed episode of Blackish. The kicks are totems to my youth. I wear them like Mercury on my black man feet. I can't get those young freedom days back fast enough. Last time I was really fast, I was 16, out running a doorman on the Upper East Side. He caught me vandalizing his building. Not even on some artsy shit, just stupid. Of all the genders, boys are the stupidest. 16 was a series of barely getting away and never telling my parents. I assume that my son is stewarding this tradition well. 16 was the low-end theory and Marvin Gaye on repeat. 16 is younger than Trayvon and older than Emmett Till. At the DMV, my boy's in line to officially enter his prime suspect years. Young, brown, and behind the wheel, a moving semaphore signaling the threat of communities from below. On top of the food chain, humans have no natural predator, but America plays out something genetically instinctive in its appetite for the black body. America guns down black bodies and then walks around them bored, like laconic lions next to half-eaten gazelles, bloody lips, America and the black body on some Nat Geo shit. At the DMV, my boy passes his road test. He does this like broken Fortnite thing on the way in to finish his paperwork. True joy and calibrated cool under the eye of my filming iPhone. He's earned this victory, but he's so 16, he can't quite let his body be fully free. When he's 3, I'm in handcuffs in downtown Oakland. 5 minutes ago, I was illegally parked. Now I'm in the back of a squad car. 5 minutes away from my son, who expects that in 18 minutes, daddy's gonna pick him up from preschool. This is what I know. I know that I was parked in a bus zone on 12th and Broadway, running quickly to the ATM on the corner. I pulled the cash out just as a police car pulls up behind me. Give him the aw shucks, my bad, that earnest black man face. He waits till I'm back in the car. Then he hits the siren, takes my license with his hand on his gun, comes back, this time with his gun drawn. Another patrol car now. 4 cops now. My face on the curb, hands behind my back, shackled. I'm angry and humiliated only until I'm scared. And then sad, I smell like the last gasp before my own death. I think how long the boy will wait before he realizes that daddy's not coming. I think how his last barely formed memory of me will be the story of how I never came for him, and so I try to telepathically say goodbye. The silence brings me no peace. The quiet makes it hard to rest. In the void, there's anger mushrooming in the moss. At the base of my thoughts, a fungus growing on the spine of my freedom attempts. I'm free from all except contempt, the spirit of an unarmed civilian in a time of civil unrest. No peace, just Marvin Gaye falsettos arching like a broken-winged sparrow, competing against the empty sirens, singing the police. Apparently some cat from Richmond had a warrant out on him. And when the cop says my name to dispatch, the dude doesn't hear Mark Joseph, he hears Mike Johnson. I count 7 cars and 18 cops on the corner now. The pride around a pound of flesh. By the grace of God, I'm not fed to the beast today, but magnanimously, the first cop makes sure to give me a ticket for parking in a bus zone before he sets me free. The boy's 16 now. Enough body to fill my shoes. I have gray in my beard, and it tells the truth. He has a license to drive in the hollow city, to navigate traffic in the age of autonomous vehicles. You know, people say the talk, like that shit happens just once. Like my memory's been erased and my internet is broken. Like I can't read today's martyred name. Like today's the day that I don't love my son enough to tell him, bruh, I really don't care about your rights, yo. Your mission is to get home to me. Live to tell me the story, boy. Get home to me. Today's talk is mostly happening in my head as Marvin Gaye comes on the radio and he pulls onto the freeway. I'm wearing the boy's shoes, and the tune in my head is the goodbye I almost never said, the goodbye, the length of a requiem, a kiss, a whiff of his neck, the length of a revelation and a request, flying high in the friendly sky without ever leaving the ground. My pain is a walking bass line, a refrain placated flush against the strain of my fading lifeline. This is not to be romantic, but to assert a plausible scenario for the existential moment. Driving while black is its own genre of experience. Ask Marvin. It may not be the reason why you sing like an angel, but it surely has something to do with why heaven bends to your voice. The boy driving, the cop in the rearview mirror is a ticket to ride or die. When you give a black boy the talk, you pray he is of the faction of the fraction that survives. You pitch him the frequency of your telepathic goodbye. Channel the love sustained in Marvin's upper register under his skull cap. Black music at its best is an exploded black hole responding to the call of America at its worst. Strike us down, the music lives. Dark like tar, like tobacco, like cotton in muddy water. Get home to me, son, like a love supreme, a God as love, A love over rules. Feathers for the angelic lift of the restless dead, like a theme for Trouble Man, or a 16-year-old boy free to make mistakes and live through them. Grow from them. Holy, holy, mercy, mercy me, mercy, mercy. Thanks. So my name is Mark Bamuti Joseph. I'm the Vice President and Artistic Director of Social Impact here at the Kennedy Center. Woo. This has been a really beautiful day because you are beautiful people. And any institution with all its brick and mortar and marble institutionality is only as great as the people inside it and making it. I am proud to be a working artist whose artistic practice includes organizational theory and application. I'm proud that the Kennedy Center has accepted me and really has accepted us all. If we're in this room, we are iconoclasts, or at the least striving to be. The people that currently embody that ethic of narrative practice, artistic striving, and political push, the people that embody that ideal more than any at the Kennedy Center are our Citizen Artist Fellows. These are people that have been nominated over time very specifically because they're dope, but maybe more selfishly because we want to be dope too. And part of what that means is, yes, striving for creative and artistic excellence, but also, yes, adopting some level of accountability at the intersection of creative excellence and social progress or social striving, social accountability. So I don't know who else does that except for the storytellers, except for the people that seek to change the world through their art. So on behalf of the institution, I would like to welcome this penultimate portion of the afternoon where we get to meet our citizen fellows and hear a little bit about why they tell the stories that they tell. So if you wouldn't mind helping me welcome our 2018-19 Citizen Artist Fellows. Y'all, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I take it you all have been enjoying this 2019 Kennedy Center Art Summit. All right. So I have been tasked with introducing what myself and my fellow cohort members will be doing. We're going to be doing an exercise called Tell Me About the Time. This is an exercise that I learned as a youth development worker in Baton Rouge, and the way it works is this. We give each other prompts, and the idea is for each of us to talk about a time when that prompt was a reality. Now, when doing this with young people, I might say something ridiculous like, tell me about the time you had to fight off a grizzly bear that was trying to take your lunch in the woods. Obviously, we're not gonna do that kind of prompt today. We'll be doing prompting around very real life experiences. This exercise is also one of authentic listening. So what will happen is that each of us will have 5 minutes to talk about a specific detailed point of our artistry and of our personhood, and it is the task for everyone else to listen. That's those of us included up here, that's those of you included in the audience. Upon us finishing all of our different narratives, we will then allow for questions from the audience. So with no further ado, let's get it started.
Pong, tell me about the time being an outsider to a community put you at odds with the powers that be, and how did you navigate that tension?
Hi, Omar. Hi, everybody. As was stated earlier this morning, I think everyone has the experience of being outsider at different points, and somehow I managed to be in that role all the time. Wherever I am, as a classically trained violinist, I'm like seen as an activist by my colleagues. I don't think I merit that title. I think I work in a way that's a little different than what I would give that kind of credit to. And in my work with communities in Boston, particularly communities of color, neighborhoods that I don't live in, folks, homicide survivors who are having experiences that I've never had of loss, I would say there are moments when people question me, but it's usually not the people I'm working with. It's usually people who, for very understandable reasons, have a lot of skepticism towards outsiders. And I've learned a lot actually from those encounters of, a pastor in Dorchester saying, what do you know about the Black community? Like, what right do you have to come here? And if I made the mistake of using the word experimentation, it's like, oh, you're another outsider coming to experiment on the Black community. And it's like, oh, I used the wrong word. And maybe I came with the wrong spirit, but it's like a learning process, and I feel really fortunate that there have been people who've come at me in different ways to allow me to learn, because I think that's our legacy as a country of being a racist country, that as a Chinese American growing up in a middle class neighborhood and schools that had very few Black folks, like I just didn't know growing up. And then when I moved to Boston 13 years ago, I started to learn. And I had encounters that, were pushed back, and I think those were important learning moments for me to re-examine myself and try to understand where people were coming from and to listen to them. And on the other hand, how I even got where Code Listen has come, we performed 2 nights ago, 22 people from Boston. We had 5 Boston police. We had, thank you, we had 5 mothers who've lost their sons to homicide, including Carla Sheffield, who was just with us, whose son was killed by Boston police. We had 2 siblings whose brothers had been killed. We had teen artists. We had guest musicians with us. How I even got to that point as an outsider to most of those folks, that when I first met them, they didn't know me. And that was an act of faith and trust that, and I will say my violin helped me out, because I tried to greet people with music. And let that be the icebreaker, and let that be an offering, so I'm not just coming as a stranger saying, I want to get to know you, I want to work with you, or I want to, understand you, with empty hands. Because in my culture, we don't ever show up with empty hands to someone else's house. So what do I have? I can offer you a song. What do you want to hear? If I don't know it, let me try to learn it. Pull out your phone and show it to me, I think I just feel fortunate that as an outsider, I've been able to meet people who were willing to take a step, take a risk, and try a little bit to be with me. And then we could build those relationships that are very important now. So now I'm going to ask Justus.
Hey, Siobhan.
Hi, how are you?
It's been a long day.
It's been a long day, right?
Thanks for staying with us.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Justus, I want you to tell us about a time that you felt compelled to compromise your health for professional reasons, and how your perspective has evolved on the work that you will accept and produce.
So thank you for the question. I want to answer this with a little bit of a story, but mostly thinking about what I offer to people who are struggling to balance their health with their artistic or not artistic profession. And so about a year ago this time, I had probably the worst. I have type 1 diabetes, the worst blood sugar I've ever had probably since I was diagnosed, from something that started really like 6 to 7 months before, working with an institution that is a medical institution that has an arts program. And there was a conflict that happened. And what's interesting, and this is where health and money do connect. I had thought, I can't do this show, I can't do this residency without some means to do this. Like, this is too hard. And I said, no, I can't do this, but thank you. And maybe if you have funding, let me know. And so a lot of the work I do is around health. And so this is something that became connected quicker than I realized. So I ended up deciding, this is a solo museum show. I actually will do this. And so they offered this residency and this experience, and but unpaid. And so I thought, I'll wing it. I'll do that. And what it also didn't have was a contract, and thinking about the contracts, you stay firm to ourselves. I had a contract with myself to not accept this initially because I thought I won't be able to do this, and I was right. And in the midst of a pending legal lawsuit and acquiring the services of Julianne Herzl, who's was my guest of honor this year, realized how intense my health suffered because there was a whole system that didn't take it into account. We would have a contract. We would pay for me to have time to sleep, to eat, to actually focus on making art. And I think even not having a long break, how you schedule something back to back to back for people of all professions can be a really big invisible burden, but particularly when it's a whole show. And there's no other category of work that I can, paid work, and that I can imagine you would ask this request, and it's done all the time in art. And so I want to think about how, instead of getting into more details of this story, to just say, what would you do, or what is not taught in art school that should be taught in art school? And I think it's, how do you choose what kind of work you do and where are the boundaries of it? So really, if your work is around a topic, around communication or health, but you will, I won't really value my health, I'll actually do this, then there's a huge contradiction that I don't see really something that can be reconciled. And so I want to kind of offer, for me, that has been something, reestablishing what's the value of my life. If my health is bad for one day, was this show worth it? And I do have a kind of a complicated answer I came up with, and I want to offer to you. Maybe. It's your health to spend if you're making the choice to spend the sleep you're not getting, the energy you don't have, maybe the higher blood sugar. It is your health to spend in some circumstances, but that the expectation that artists should or will be in circumstances where they will have to spend their health is something I really, even over the last year thinking about this fellowship, our health and our personhood as artists aren't separable. So a year later, I feel so happy to have an angel that came into my life through reaching out to Lawyers for the Creative Arts in Chicago, and also a perspective of what's really at stake and what is even my work, because the work was really the contract between the museum in the end, and the work is saying yes or saying no. And these are things you may not be taught in art school, but or pedagogy, things that don't connect. The economy behind what you do and the choices you make and your personal health are all very intimately connected.
Thank you, Justus.
All right, so Donney, who gave us this format. Tell me about the time your personhood was brought into question on account of your artistry, and what were some takeaways for you from that moment?
The most vivid story I can I can think of, about 2 years ago, I was enthralled in this kind of community-wide debate, argument, whatever you want to call it, with a local politician. I'll give some backstory as to how this all came about. So in 2006, Alton Sterling was murdered in Baton Rouge by Baton Rouge police. I was a part of a group of organizers, advocates, artists that were helping to coordinate protests and things of that nature in the aftermath of that killing. Fast forward a year later, myself and a few other people were contracted through the city of Baton Rouge to work with a program called BRAVE. The initial impetus of BRAVE was more or less to do kind of police-related programming, but the new mayor of Baton Rouge wanted some arts-based and other initiatives from artisans and entrepreneurs of color to help what would be considered at-risk young people. Fast forward, there was a Metro Council city meeting that came up where a very outspoken activist said something to the effect about the Baton Rouge police were responsible to a certain extent for a killing that took place to Baton Rouge police in response to what happened with Alton Sterling. I did not 100% co-sign the tone of that message, but the intent behind it, I understood what that person was talking about. Long story short, a Metro Council member sees this and decides to say, blast on Facebook, like, the mayor wants to give Donney Rose this amount of money for working with young people. Look at what he's saying about our city's police. And even more so, what he said was, Donney Rose is getting paid this X amount of money to work with a bunch of young thugs. Now, the thing about this is the young people who were being the beneficiaries of this program were those of the most impoverished zip codes in Baton Rouge. What needs to be understood about Baton Rouge is that there is roughly a $50,000 median income gap between white and black families. These zip codes are some of the most disparate zip codes, not only in the state, not only in the city, but in the country. So what happens is this information kind of floats around Facebook for a day or so. Before you know it, a bunch of folks who were allies of mine, community partners, friends, just kind of like launched an attack against this guy. This Metro Council member who he himself had a lot of skeletons in his own closet. He had bars that were running relatively illegally, underage drinking, but as what often happens in cases of folks trying to exert power over marginalized people, you will be placed in a position of that which is an enemy. And the idea is to get you to cower and to retreat. What did not happen in that particular case was that, fast forward, so a few days later, me and this Metro Council member sat down and met face to face. And I told him what he would, but most importantly, what he would not do. And what I told him about what he would not do was continue to disparage the young people I work with. Say what you need to about me, but we're not going to continue on that pathway. And we got to a lot of hardcore realizations because previously we never met each other. And we reached a lot of truths. And he apologized to me in that moment. He apologized to me publicly on Facebook, and he basically kind of backed down. Now after that, he sent me a friend request, which I respectfully declined. And the reason I did so is because this person often functions as somewhat of a troll, somewhat of a pariah. And just because there was a moment of clarity did not mean that I was going to open up my world to a continuous level of trolling, to a continuous level of harassment. Because what he did was succumb to communal pressure. He didn't necessarily have this revolutionary breakthrough of personhood. But for me, no, I'm just saying. So what I learned in that moment
is to rely on community to have your back and to be your voice when you think that they may not be there. And if you're out here doing good work, when it's time for someone to come and speak to your defense, it will happen because you will have the personhood to back it. Rulan, tell me about the time a basket of squash led you to the Kennedy Center.
Yeah, I want to tell you about that time because it's a story about how an artist's response of resilience and creativity can transform a situation of lack. So I think it was a couple years ago, we had just completed this major work about the protection of water. It was probably, it was between 2006 and 13. And you know, we had, it was a piece that ended up having 21 dancers in it because they said, this is our story to tell. And it was a magnificent work, walking at the edge of water. And it got no touring gigs because people didn't want to host that many dancers. So we had no gigs. That's how we earn a living. We had no gigs. So then I was looking for grants. I wrote 55 of them, was turned down from 53 of them. So we were in a drought. I live in a desert, and it was a time of drought. And I was, saying to myself, okay, is this supposed to happen, this new work, to create a new work so that we can try to get more gigs and earn our money? And it's funny, I think the places that we're at inform what happens. The ecosystem of the desert, it looks very sparse, it looks like nothing's there, but these plants have learned all of these incredible, inventive ways to survive off of drops of water. Just all kinds of ways of doing that. So I knew that, but I didn't know that yet. So what happened was, yes, the dancers were still around, and they were hungry. They were ready, they were hungry to make the work, and they were hungry. So I had to feed them, and I was nervous for that responsibility. I didn't know how to fulfill it without, cash. And there was a student in the company. She wasn't a dancer yet, and she came bearing this basket of squash, and we ate really well. And she introduced me to other farmers, and they were so pleased to see us, enjoy the food and appreciate the food and have we were saying now it gives us energy to be able to dance and move. And there were different farmers, elders, culture carriers in that region who had been, cultivating corn, beans, and squash since, for millennia. And they saw in us these strong representatives that could go out in the world and share the importance, because they're fighting for things like water to be protected from uranium, or uranium also in the soil. So people need to know about the importance of this, and young people need to remember that these are the important foods that we have. So she became a principal dancer in the company and she said, I don't know if I can do all those moves. I said, yeah, the moves that you're doing, those are the ones that we need to learn for true sustainability, so we can weather, the highs and lows of funding and grants and all that, or the whole economic system, the whole system of money. When and if and when that goes, we'll be able to eat if we learn your ways of moving. So not only did we learn about how to cultivate food and honor the farmers who were doing it, their voices, actually, if anyone came to the Friday evening performance, those were their voices on the stage. And it's not just about the farming itself, it's like connecting into the constellations, when to plant, all of that. So it's basically like how to live on Earth. But we also danced the squash itself, we started to feel a lot like squash, like we're underground. We've got to push up towards the sun. And then, we got roots, and we're round, and we're down to the ground. And that ideally, that we don't grow as one monocrop, that we grow along with the other sisters, the corn and beans. That squash is literally low to the ground, so we use those big shady movements. That became our movements, looking at how they grow. That the beans they have vines that twist around these strong corn, so that became our dance. That was on stage. And that we have, that we have roots, and that even after our time withers, that there's seeds that come back over and over and over again. So, we sort of we had that sense of connection that we didn't have before, but through really real, practical, an example of scarcity and lack that led to this incredible blossoming and resilience that was on the stage at the Millennium Stage just the other night. Omar, so the question I have for you is, my mom wants your number. Oh, that's all right. She's a fan, she's a fan. Oh, that's not the question. All right. So can you tell me about the time that you endured a series of misfortunes and still were able to fulfill the deliverables and obligations that were required of you as an artist?
Yes, in a second. Can we have another round of applause for my phenomenal cohort here? How beautiful are these people? I want to just restate that the greatest takeaway from this fellowship for me has been getting to know them. This institution is lovely, the people who work here are fantastic, but these people right here are what made this past year so exceptional. I was standing up on the balcony here yesterday afternoon with my fellow performers, Ronnie and Joey, and I was reminded of something that happened back in 2007 right across the river. I was a young Syrian-American rapper using my art and my platform that is rooted in African-American struggle and tradition, which I have to acknowledge, and using it to speak truth to power and to speak to my experience as a marginalized person in this society here, collaborating with, at the time, a Palestinian rapper and Iraqi rapper. Created a song that was pushing back on the sort of racial profiling that we were dealing with. Wanted to film a video for it. A good friend of mine lived in a building in Arlington, got permission from them to let us film on the rooftop so we could have the beautiful skyline of Washington, D.C. I grew up out here, so the beautiful skyline of D.C. behind us. And in that process, making that video, tackling this issue of profiling and speaking out against the war in Iraq and things like that, somebody on the rooftop called the FBI. And we were interrogated, and it was obviously a pretty terrifying experience for a young rapper trying to come up in this world, let alone somebody with a background like mine. And it really kind of made me question a lot of things. Like, was this the sort of career that I really wanted to embark upon? Was this the kind of thing that I wanted to do? What kind of doors would be slamming in front of my face before I even get to kind of speak my truth and all of that. But I pushed through, and I had the support of people, some of whom are in this audience, to push through and to keep doing what I do and to recognize the importance in it, and to not let something like that, set me back. A decade later, here I am, a Citizen Artist Fellow, something I'm very proud of. I have memories of coming here as a child, and never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be sort of in this situation. And one of the things that we were first told when we got here to begin this process as fellows was to kind of take this moment to actualize something that you've had in mind for a while and ask, or if there's a project that you've had that you wanted to realize. And that's how my Little Syria project was born. And so, a couple things started to happen really nicely, that I'd gotten an artist residency at the University of Michigan and was able to really develop this project there. And one of the things I had in mind was to create a beautiful little wooden sign that could have this lovely logo that a friend of mine had created for our project. I met an artist in Michigan who was able to create it for me, a really beautiful piece. And so wanted to pay her for her services afterwards. And I asked her how I could pay her. She said PayPal would be the best thing to do. Sent her money with PayPal, and in the description I said, for creating Little Syria signage. And I got an email back saying that the payment was reversed and flagged because I had the word Syria in the description. So I've been thinking of a master plan. Cause there ain't nothing but the sweat on my mama's brow ever since we left Damascus. Wanna know where to settle down, running like the river, couple babies in a basket, we get around. Tupac Shakur, who's got the cure to stop the furor of cops and war over hollow ground? When hearts were pure, the bombs were not. Who's got some more to drop and harm the flock? Manure you talk? Shit, holes that we coming from? Then why you digging in the dirt that we running from? Black gold in the desert got 'em plundering. This ain't a jungle, but sometimes I'm left wondering how many more gotta die before you listen. Running out of breath trying to catch your attention. Now ain't the time to go half on this mission. Give me liberty or death from your open air prison where it's too hot to fit in. No pot to piss in. Refugees, please, hands, knees, submission to the most high. Crossing the seas, knowing most die. Praying at dry land close by. Why try? Unless we thought that it was safer than the places we escaped from. Head heavy like a bass drum. Going wherever wind takes us. Chasing them papers that you take for granted. Like a kitchen counter, and all the meals that you waste on it. We only wish that we could taste some. Must be nice, trust me, ice. Give us the chills when we face them. They kick us out and get a pay stub. Pyramid schemes of a mason. But by the time the right folks finally ask, should I say something? The wrong ones done erased us. Chosen ones never chose this. Tiptoeing on a precipice of indefinite exodus. The pharaohs want us hopeless. Only concern is his own bliss. Chauvinist on a presidential pulpit. New story with an old twist. Too gory for these poor kids. Lord, please help us focus. Send us another brother Moses to replace him. Send us another brother Moses to replace him. It's 2019 and people are getting killed in houses of worship all over this world. The only way we can push back against that sort of thing is through art and love. That's my firm belief, so thank you.
Cool. So that was our discussion time. I do want to confess something. As the person that kind of facilitated this, I made an error in the sense to where I should have told you all that we were not to applaud after stories, and the reason why is that we do not want the storytellers to look at their stories as some sort of performance. And that's not no shade to what you just did, because it was dope. But I'm saying in general, if you were to replicate this exercise with young people, anybody that you may work with, the idea is that you deconstruct the performative aspect of it, because you want people to get to as much of their authentic storytelling as possible. So my fault for not saying that. I appreciate all the applause that everyone got, but I should have told you that on the front end. So now, now that we've heard these incredible, compelling narratives, do any of you have questions for any of us?
Rachel from Phoenix. You guys are wonderful. Were any of you surprised to learn that you were chosen as Citizen Artist Fellows? Did the news come as a surprise?
I was.
How did you react?
I definitely was. I come from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. When I say I'm from Louisiana, people automatically in default are like, oh, you're from New Orleans, right? There are people who I've met and I've said that I'm from Baton Rouge and they're like, this is Donney, he's from New Orleans. But I'm not. I never have been. So I think that for me, and this is something that we as artists often talk about, I had to get over the concept of imposter syndrome. Because I'm coming from this relatively mid-sized town in the Deep South, and I'm here at this national stage, the premier performing arts institute in the world. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? But once I got over this initial, I guess, feeling of imposter syndrome, I had to go back and check my own records. So this year, 2019, is my 20th anniversary as a spoken word poet. I started performing poetry at age 19. I'll be 39 in August, right? I also had to take into account that I've been a teaching artist at this point for 13 years, that I've done my due diligence to curate the craft of spoken word in my city, in my state, regionally, and so, you know, that also happened, right? I forgot to mention that in the whole story about the Metro Council member who was coming for our young people a week after they won the Brave New Voices International Slam title. But no, don't clap about that, because the problem with that was when people were defending those young people, We were like, yeah, they did win that, but the ones that you are attacking are the ones that do not even have the privilege to get to that. You were attacking young people in our city from a more disparate zip code. The young people who won Brave New Voices, as great as they were products of a magnet high school. They had certain advantages that the young people who were being attacked did not, but I digress. Back to kind of like the point, and I'll wrap up. I was initially surprised. And when I got to reading the resumes and bios of the folks around me, I asked myself again, how do I fit, am I the square peg trying to fit into a round hole? But as soon as I met these people and got in community with them, I knew that we were all supposed to be here on equal footing, and that we all brought a particular energy and a particular righteousness to this fellowship. And I feel the same way about 1920. I've been around them for a little bit, but those are some beautiful people. And I'm gonna tell you that the beneficiaries are not them, the beneficiaries are the Kennedy Center. And I think that needs to kind of be understood probably from this point going forward. Whenever a cohort of citizen artists, fellows are brought here, yes, we get to go out in the world and say we are this. But also this institution gets to say we have given a platform to some amazing people.
Let's do a funny little anecdote. When we were first told about this process, we received an initial email saying, congratulations, you were nominated, and now you've been thrown into a pool of, I think, like 25 people or something, so you might get it. Up until that point, I didn't know about it. I wasn't nervous about it, and then all of a sudden, I was like, oh shit, am I gonna get this thing or not? But yeah, got it, and the rest is history. And thank you to everybody involved. I have to say that the Citizen Artist Fellow team that works here at the Kennedy Center are some of the most thoughtful and really sweet people, and friends of ours throughout this process, and allies of ours throughout this process. So thank you, Mario. Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Xavier. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Deborah.
Hi, I'm talking again. Is it on? Okay, hello, I'm Taika. I was going to ask you guys, how did you know you were ready to be a citizen artist? You kind of answered it a little bit, but everyone else, how did you guys know that you were ready to be citizen artists, ready to take on the Kennedy Center, which I'm sort of from this area. I was like, oh, it's Kennedy Center, it's no big deal. And then I'm meeting people here and they're like, no, it's a big deal. So, yes.
I'm just gonna throw a what makes it complicated is this idea of what is a citizen artist, and you get nominated or you get selected, and I think to repeat the question, can you help me? I want to do this for you all, because the question. How did you know you were ready? Okay, I just think it's responsible to do that. So, I don't know if you can be for something so undefined. One, and then I want to kind of throw it back. I've actually threw this really loose definition that encompasses some people who consider themselves artists and some who don't. Collaborators, friends. Over this year, I've had people come into my life that are not artists, or they don't call themselves artists, who I feel like citizen artist rings true. And so it goes beyond those words as they're normally defined. So, and I also wanted to just briefly recognize Colin Reed, who is a collaborator on this project, works in genomics and art, and it's kind of been one of those things where I'm like, oh, this definition, I can recognize it, but I'm not sure the words are enough. And so I'll just leave it with that. It's still open.
I might tag on to that and just say that I really appreciate our first meeting, Donney, when you said you came with your community at your back. And I think for anything that uses the word citizen artist and comprises people like us, and probably the majority of people or everybody in this room, what you do, it's like it's not a one-person deal. We do get to have superheroes to take home, which we're very excited about, but but we're not superheroes. We are working in community. We are people who collaborate. We are like deep collaborators, and there are so many people. I'm seeing some collaborators in the audience, that make what is visible. and creates the work together. So that's, I think maybe that's one of the defining things, is that like we're getting to have this recognition, but it's actually recognition of the communities that we're a part of.
A question I have is for Omar and others. How do you face that the very nature of who you are and what you do is flagged or triggered, for instance, saying the word Syria, that fear to be who you are, for instance, being a young man driving a car who's African American, and how that influences your art? Does it strive you forward more? Does it hold you back?
That's a really good question. I think I'm really lucky in the sense that I had the support of my mother growing up, who studied Arabic literature in Damascus and really, really loved Arabic poetry and showed me her love of our culture through this poetry. And so it was always a source of pride for me, and always something that I knew I had to be very proud of and hold my head high and show people the grace and the dignity of my culture, and to never let this foolishness that's in the media get in the way of understanding how valuable and precious and beautiful my culture is. Add to that the fact that I am also participating in hip-hop culture, again rooted in the African-American traditions of struggle and resistance here in this country, and art and beauty, and manifested in this beautiful universal culture now that everybody has found some way to speak to. It's something that's humbling. It reminds me that, you know, no matter how hard I think I have it, there's people on this earth walking this land with me who, you know, who deal with things on a deeper, even more difficult level, and to keep things in perspective. There's also this like feeling of imposter syndrome that's been kind of said a few times, you know, and that's, you know, the Syrian conflict only started, you could say, like 8 years ago, though it's been fomenting for a long time, and it's certainly connected to all the other issues in the region. But, you know, we got here in the 80s. We got here before this current catastrophe that we've been witnessing. In some ways, I mean, I joked about it, it's like that little sperm that made it to the egg, and like all of a sudden you've got this huge opportunity, you know, and this like, wow, and that's been magnified and amplified these last 8 years for me. I feel like this huge sort of sense of responsibility to do that and to carry it forth, but at the same time, you know, I pick up a book of poetry that my mom had given me as a child, and I just kind of feel at peace. It's my kitchen table, you know, with my mother. Is this book, you know, literally with the lines that she had highlighted in it, and I pick it up like 30 years later, and I end up using it as the main theme of this piece that I just performed for you all, that I hope to take across the country. You know, where was she 30 years ago, writing that down, and you know, where am I now, and how important all of that is, and to not let fear or to let, you know, ignorance get in the way of me living out this art and this beauty in a way that I think honors the ancestors who made it possible for me to be here. So. Thank you for that question.
I guess if I can add to it, I think that for a lot of us as art makers, we look at it from a perspective of resisting what is and reimagining what could be. And so I'm personally fueled by the idea of someone being a little bit uncomfortable with certain truths that I have to offer. I'm fueled by the idea of disrupting what is, you know, considered the status quo. The personal is always the political, right? And so for me, I look at a few different things. When I was born, I was 3 pounds. I was not expected to live within past the first 6 months of my life. When I was a junior in college, my mother passed away. In 2014, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. 3 years later, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I have my own personal things that I deal with. So actually, to a certain extent, dealing with systemic oppression and systemic racism is almost light work. Like it's a real thing. It's a real thing, but my personhood and my humanity comes first, right? And so I think that for a lot of us, we decide to rewrite or replay or re-sing or re-rap or redraw or redance the world as we see it best, you know. And so I from what I've discovered working with these people around me is that we are fueled by the idea of, you know, dismantling systems that are opposed to us. Like, you know, what the hell is oppression when you have a better world to reimagine?
Hi, thank you. I had a quick question. We've heard the word responsibility talked a lot about the responsibility of an artist or the responsibility of a citizen artist, and I was curious each of your takes if that's a burden or an opportunity or something in between.
I'd spoken in the other workshop about a medicine wheel, a circle with 4 points in 4 directions. One interpretation of that are Anishinaabe principles for living, 4 of the principles for living a good life. And respect, relationship making, reciprocity, and responsibility are those 4 stones. And I think responsibility is something that can be, I mean, they all relate to each other, all those 4, they're not separate. So for me, it's an honor to be able to be, for cultural to be shared in the midst of our dance collective, for that to be our responsibility to embody and to share, selectively share with guidance. And so to take that responsibility is an honor. And it's not the same as like pure creativity. It's being, you know, cultural ambassadors. So even though a dancer might be 19 years old and coming with me here to the Kennedy Center, they need to be able to greet in their language as their grandmother has instructed them to do. They need to be able to bring cornmeal to the Piscataway representative so that they can represent themselves, for example, as a Donney person. So there's a lot that is being carried. And I think it shows why we're doing things. We're doing things because there's a community that has our back. And so because of that, we've got to walk with dignity and with honor.
I've heard a lot of you, talking about responsibility, talk about like a moment throughout the day that you felt, I guess, worthy of doing this work in one way or another. And I think about how so many of us who are on the stage, for one reason or another, because of the way that we spoke or our literal accent or our first language, we're kind of made to feel less than other folks because of the way that we spoke. So I wonder about a moment when, with younger folks in mind who may be watching this, a moment when you realized that you were proud of where you were from and proud of your voice and how that changed your work.
I'm almost afraid to start because I feel like that ding is going to ding any second now. But I think for me, there's a lot of like moments where I felt, a sense of pride and a push to want to keep doing this. But there was something that happened to me when I was in college. I mean, halfway through my college career, 9/11 happened. Prior to that, I was just an ethnically ambiguous dude named Omar that everybody thought was Puerto Rican or Greek or something. Nobody really knew. Hip hop culture accepted me and didn't really kind of question it because for my friends, it was more so about how dope of an MC they thought I was. That was first and foremost. My skill level, my ability to hold the mic and to command a crowd, and all of that was first and foremost, After 9/11, all of a sudden I started noticing people observing me differently, taking in the things that I was saying very differently, and all of a sudden it was just a political act in and of itself to just even be proud of who I was and stand up on stage. And, so it's like, and in that moment, I realized that the medium really is the message. And so, the things I'm saying are speaking directly to these issues, but the fact that it's me saying it proudly in the spaces that I take it, head held high and affirming, narratives that are often suppressed and pushing forward agendas that I think, can further just a deeper understanding of cultures in this really, really critical time. That's what I realized in that moment, that was going to be my calling in many ways. And I never thought that 10 years later we'd still be dealing with this, let alone as horribly as we seem to be now. But at the same time, in this really difficult mess that we find ourselves in as a nation right now, there's some incredible art being made, some really beautiful things happening. And I feel so honored to be able to travel across the country, be invited to different places, and to see different parts of this country, and really get a holistic picture of just how much of a wealth of potential there is all over, especially in the youth, and the places that I get to enter and hear young people speak their truth and give me life with each and every breath. So that, you know, I became a father 3 years ago, and again 4 months ago, and you know, my wife is black and Jewish, and I'm Muslim and Syrian and immigrant, and there's a lot of things that these kids are going to be carrying with them. And so I am actively trying to create the cultural spaces that I want them to inherit, and that's just, you know, just a bigger reason to keep doing what I'm doing, and that what we're all doing, and I think a lot of people in this room probably feel. And so it is a responsibility, but it's not the kind of responsibility that you feel sluggish about or feel weighed down by. It's something that you just, you know, it's your calling. You're here to do this. This is what we're here to do, and it's work. And like Khalil Gibran said, work is love made visible. So make your love visible to this world through your commitment to work that is meaningful.
Quickly, I'll say that my pride comes from the spectrum of generations. So when someone who knew me as a baby who is now gray-haired tells me how much they appreciate what I'm doing, all the way to when a young person I mentor will tell me that they're proud of me. That's where the pride swell comes from. Having a variety of people give reverence to me, especially coming from a place that is often sidebarred or dismissed, that brings me a great deal of pride and joy.
I think this idea of taking pride, like I'm at the front of things. I'm you know, trying to make things happen. I'm trying to advocate, and sometimes when you're front, you're bumping your head a lot. I think even maybe it was last month, I was like completely disempowered and felt really terribly about a conversation that had to do with publicity and what was considered publicity worthy. That really hurt me and brought my self-esteem low. But when I looked back at the dancers and see what they're doing with their lives, then I know I'm doing something right. And I know it's really important for me to not participate in the global imperialism of divide and conquer. And so that means that I don't want to be a part of lateral oppression, including to myself, of like not enoughness. And so that is one of the reasons why I made Dancing Earth. But you know, whenever I'm not sure about, like, you know, when I'm feeling down, feeling low, I have to remember that to take a stance and to be able to stand in pride and know, because of the community that I'm holding hands with, it uplifts us all. And that we need that kind of strength and belief in ourselves in order to be able to reimagine the world, to stand in the futurity that we want to be making.
Just want to share a quick anecdote. I hear what everyone is saying, and I feel that definitely the affirmation from the people I work with is probably the biggest driver for me. But I can think of an anecdote from earlier in my life when I was in high school. As a, you know, not very tall Asian American woman, I played water polo. I was on my high school's first water polo team, and you know, in water polo, it's like everything happens underwater, so you don't really see the dirt. And at some point, a much bigger player kicked me in the stomach and said, "Don't fuck with me, little girl." And it pissed me off. It like just charged me in this way that was kind of like, okay, you think I'm a little girl? You think you can kick me in the stomach? No way. And I think that's the kind of thing where it's like, we're talking about how experiences that want to push you back can make you rise even stronger. That's that kind of energy where it's like, if people are looking at me and they see something, well, they don't see everything yet. And I think that's how you guys all operate in the world, and that's amazing.
And I just kind of, with that, I think also thinking about like what, for me, one of the things is where art doesn't seem like, and I see this in all of the fellows, where it doesn't belong yet, or where it's not comfy. Like, I think that's the other thing. And people through this program and outside, like when you recognize, oh wait, my art's like in a place that shouldn't be, or arts, it's not comfy yet. They don't have an arts program. Whether it's, for me, often it's like more working with companies, or is this a healthcare initiative? And it's like, wait, you're just making that up, but then people are responsive, and then the work is, okay, they're convinced, and now you have to convince them how to do more. And I think when you break new ground, or you re-include it to people's experiences who have positions of power in the industries they are, there's a sense of real satisfaction, like, oh wow, like in the future, art will be in all of these places and experiences.
Let's hear it again for our Citizen Artist Fellows. Yeah. So one of the things that came in right away out of the first year of the Citizen Artist Fellowship was this idea of my fellow fellows, right? The fellowship of the fellowship, and I think that story remains true and really strong. So hopefully you got a sense of that as those deep connections and bonds that they really build among each other. So as we begin to wrap up our day and to process our day, just give you a little context. So this past year, the folks over at NPR have been in the midst of a year-long deep dive into storytelling, right? And looking at American anthems. And as they look at those anthems across time and period and genres and places, there was a common theme, and that was the spirit of a unified community. And so in that same vein, as we've spent time building the community of us, right, the story of us today, we're now going to welcome a group of artists out who are going to embrace the challenge that was set on them at the beginning of the day. I'm just going to keep dancing around this platform as if it's all planned. The challenge set on them was to participate in the day, listen to the day, and then help translate our story into a piece of music. So this is our anthem of the day. So I'm going to tell us all the artists, and then we're going to welcome them with a round of applause. So Amy K. Bormett, Shirzette Tinnen, Sarah Hughes, Corrine Chapdelaine, and Faye Victor will give us the anthem of us. Here they are.
I watched some YouTube videos earlier of black men playing the piano, so I think I got it. I think I got it worked out now. We must work on it. Can you like hit the drums hard enough? Like, you know, like you say with men and stuff? I'm just, you know, because I like it, you know, I like it loud, you know. I don't want any of that like girly kind of fluff stuff. We're not gonna play any ballads, so.
Well, I have a story to tell. I'd like to tell it with a microphone. You know, I was doing this gig, a really big venue in New York, and this guy came up to me after the set, and he said, "Wow, you're really a good singer. You articulate so well." He said, "Articulation." I was like, "What is that?"
Well, I have a story to tell as well. My colleague from the conservatory, the other day, he looked at me and he's like, "Sarah, you know what? Girls can't play jazz." And you know why they can't play jazz? It's because they didn't go outside and play enough when they were little girls.
He's met all the little girls in the world, hasn't he? So he knew that, right? Every last girl in the world, an expert. At jazz. Horrible. you join us? We built the world. Everybody, we built the world. We built the world. We built the Please, everybody, keep that going. We built the world, building empathy over sympathy. We built the world. We built the world. We built the world. Ooh, we built the world. 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 Yeah. We built the world. 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 Harmonize on it, yeah. We built the world. Woo. We built the world. We built the world. We build the world. We do. We build the world. 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 Andy Barnett.
Faye Victor, Sarah Hughes, Shirazette Tinnen, and Karen Chapdelaine. Thank you.
Please welcome back to the stage Eric Liu.
One more round of applause. What a gift. I'm on mic A1. I know this is for the live stream. Wonderful. What a gift. And what a gift this whole day has been. My task here before handing the mic over to Deborah is just to try to help us make a little sense of what we've just done today and to spend a little bit of time stitching together how we've been creating together. And I think it's rather fitting that we ended with jazz, because I mean, so for so many reasons, but I think one of the most fundamental ones when
VJ and I started this morning talking about the meanings of canon. And we talked about the ways in which, there's canon as the musical form that's like a round where one voice starts and then the next voice starts an interval later. And then there's the second meaning, which is the stuff everybody ought to know. There's a third meaning that actually one of our participants during the break told me that she thought we meant when VJ and I started, because she didn't have the musical context for what we were talking about. She thought, I thought you were talking about like a cannon, like a cannonball, like boom. And I thought, well, that's both really interesting, and there's something to do with that. And actually, I think jazz embodies, in a sense, all three meanings. The idea of canon in the sense that it's a musical form, one line following another, interweaving, responding to one another with a spirit of improvisation as you go, and having a certain set of things that are set, a chord chart, but then being able and willing to create and improvise off of that. The deeper sense as well that jazz embodies and represents that this is something we all ought to know. And I say that, you may or may not know a full long list of jazz artists, contemporary or past, but we all ought to know as people who happen to be in the United States right now that jazz is one of the greatest single expressions of the American idea that there is. The idea of fusion of traditions, the idea of hybridity of cultures, the idea of recognizing, as J. Period was showing us throughout the day, the layering upon layering upon layering, not only of genre and style and allusions, but of metaphor and meaning and story. So jazz is the American canon. There is no American canon without jazz, and there's no way to think about and understand America without embracing jazz. But the other reason why I think it's so important is that third definition, that there's something that though that music was, the artist came out here joking about playing quietly, and are you strong enough to bang on the drums? But the force of what they created there with us together, it had the force of a cannonball. It had the force of not a weapon, but an announcement of something, again, beautiful, Kennedy Center, American. That was happening here, but not only American. I think the theme of our day together here in the Art Summit has been the human journey. And one of the things that I want to really emphasize here, when you think about the ways in which in all three notions of canon, C-A-N-O-N or C-A-N-N-O-N, the ways in which past and present are crammed into a barrel together, the way in which the stories that we inherit, the stories that we wish we didn't have to inherit, the traumas, the triumphs that are all laid out there in front of us that we have to make some sense of, that notion of canon is so central to another word that I think it was J. Period who said earlier today, and I think he was talking about hip hop, but I actually take it to mean something larger. He used the word supergenre. You may remember that this morning. The idea of hip hop as a supergenre, right? And to me, I think one of the things that we've got to remember here in reckoning with the meaning of citizen artistry is that citizenship, and I don't mean documentation status, I don't mean whether you have papers or passports of the United States, I mean citizenship in this deeper ethical sense of being a contributor to community, a pro-social member of the body, right? That deeper, bigger sense of citizenship is a supergenre. It is a supergenre that is drawing from every tradition that is represented in this room and every tradition that's frankly not in this room. Genres of voice, genres of identity, genres of imagery, genres of history. And what we've got to do as citizens, and this was something that really struck me in the breakout session that I got to be part of, which was about the radical art of listening, and we heard from some remarkable participants. Won't call them panelists because they were performers, they were participants, they were creators of this session together. And the deepest takeaway for me from that session, which I think extends throughout the weave and the interweaving of lines of music and story throughout this day, is the idea that when you are committed to the radical act of listening, full body listening, Do I really see you? Do I really hear you? Do I really recognize your humanity in a space like this, or even better, when you leave a space like this and you're just walking through DC, or you hop on the metro and you just encounter somebody who, for all of our good words and all of our announced, signaled virtues of being good people, that we will revert back to our less admirable ways of being in the big city. And then when that happens, we've got to ask ourselves, how? How are we actually committing to one another to listen? And when you do that deep, full body, 360 degree, every fiber of your being, every cell and every aspect of your spirit committed to listening, that's hard enough. God knows in civic life in the United States right now, there aren't enough people doing that. What Dave Isay was talking about in the project they're doing with StoryCorps to actually invite people to enter into a closed booth and tell their stories across lines of ideology and political divides. Guess what? We are in a closed booth. Right now, we are in this closed room, but even when you walk out of this space and you walk over to the metro and you walk over and you hop in your car, you are in a closed booth. And the question is, who are you listening to and how are you committing? Right? But one of the things that struck me most in that session was even when we commit that fully and deeply to listening radically and really trying to humanize, because what is the human journey but actually combating the instincts and the incentives to dehumanize? When we commit to humanizing, as hard as that is, that's not enough. That is just the price of the ticket. That's just to get in the door. And what actually has to happen after we commit to listening and receiving and taking in all of these ideas and challenges and provocations and inspirations is then we have to commit to creating. That listening is only as good as what you do with it. That the hearing of things and ideas is only as good as what you make of it. That the receiving of all of these influences is only as good as what you then remix and transmit. Otherwise, you're just indulging in self-gratification. Selfishness. I shall receive, but I shall not recirculate? No. There's nothing about the Citizen Artist Fellows Program. There's nothing about the Kennedy Center. There's nothing about the challenges of our times right now that says that simply receiving and not giving is enough. And so our commitment to one another here in this day of storytelling, this day of story harvesting, this day of weaving lines of music and tradition and identity together to create sounds and stories and spirits that we haven't yet fully experienced before. Our charge is not just to walk away feeling satisfied and gratified and full and nourished, which we all are. Our charge is actually to think about, what will we now create? What will I make of this? Some of you are artists by trade, by vocation, and some of you are already filling notebooks with things you're going to create. Theater pieces, dance pieces, music compositions, improvisations. But everybody in this room, whether you have the label artist or not, top on your business card, is, in that broadest, biggest, capacious sense I said, a citizen. And every citizen artist in this room has an opportunity and an obligation now to think about what you're going to create, what relationship you're going to create, what new space of empathy, sympathy, and rehumanization you're going to create, what new narrative of us you're going to create. And you're going to do that in your libraries, in your schools. You're going to do that in your performing arts centers. You're going to do that at the dinner table. You're going to do that on the metro. You're going to do that every waking moment of your lives as members of this body. I want to close with this thought. Our work at Citizen University, one of the things that we've been grateful to get to do over the last couple of years is, of course, partner with the Kennedy Center in helping to add our thoughts and ideas and knowledge to bring to bear to the creation of the Arts Summit. But I don't think we should end without, again, giving kudos to Vanessa, Mario, and the entire team that has architected this whole day and this whole gathering. One of the things we do at Citizen University is something called Civic Saturdays, and these are gatherings that some of you know about and participated in. They're basically a civic equivalent to a faith gathering. It's not a faith gathering, it's not mosque or synagogue or church, but it has the arc of a faith gathering. And it occurred to me sitting there as we all began singing together that over the course of this day, we too had created a Civic Monday here. We had spent a day together in fellowship. We had spent a day singing, finding the power of our voices together. We had spent a day reckoning with texts that we had inherited or found that were part of the patchwork of American identity, and asking ourselves, what do we think of these texts? In your programs are little pieces of what you might think of as civic scripture from John F. Kennedy, said over the years at different points. Some are famous, some less so. You've heard different people using words and sometimes using other forms of expression to help us make moral sense of the challenges and opportunities of our times and what our obligations are as citizens. So we've been together today in a house of worship. The thing we've been worshiping is not a deity. The thing we've been worshiping is our humanity. And the thing we've been worshiping is the opportunity to be the biggest possible citizens we can be, which means to be the deepest, most open-hearted humans we can be. And I want to close with a 4-word story that we all told today, because storytelling has been a theme throughout our summit together. And the story is a story that is as old as the world, but it's also as fresh as something that you all have just been vocalizing together. And it goes like this: we built the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're looking at the girl who drew the short straw twice. Dear friends, I am overfilled with thoughts and ideas and emotions. And we say thank you to the team who created the day. We say thank you to all of the artists who performed today and who performed with great spontaneity, to our long conversationalists, to our incredible fellows who we're not sad to see you go because you come back. It's so great to see VJ and CJ, and I hope that you will come back. And welcome to our new fellows. It is a community that we have built here. I hope that you will continue to give us the feedback about what moved you, what we can do better, and how we can draw a larger conversation. And I try really hard every day to be an artist in my private moments, but I'm always moved by the great language, the great ideas, the great humility that our artists are sharing with us. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for continuing to be a part of the maybe army is not the right word, but whatever the beautiful word for army, the orchestra, the ensemble that builds the world. And thank you for being here and being a part of our family every day. Thank you. Come and have a drink.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom